The axe came down and the wood split clean. Two pieces fell away from the stump, white flesh exposed where the blade had bitten through. Jack Harlan set another round on the weathered block, lifted the axe overhead, brought it down with the practiced economy of a man who had done this 10,000 times before. The motion was ritual. 41 years and his hands still remembered the rhythm of simple work, the clean separation of an edge meeting resistance. Not like the other kind of violence. Not like the kind that woke him at 0300, sheets soaked through, David Mitchell's voice echoing across 4 decades of nightmares. The Montana morning carried the bite of early October. Frost painted the meadowgrass silver, a blanket that would burn off by noon when the sun cleared the Bitterroot Peaks. Harlan worked in a thermal shirt and canvas pants, his shoulders still broad at 67, the muscle maintained through labor rather than machinery. Retired Marines did not go soft. Not the ones who had carried dead brothers through darkness. Not the ones who remembered what happened when you let yourself weaken. He stacked split wood against the cabin wall, adding to the cord that would carry him through winter. The routine never varied. Wake at 0500. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Split wood until sunlight touched the valley floor. Feed the horses, check fence lines. Lunch at 1200. Afternoon maintenance. Dinner at 1800. Sleep by 2100. The structure kept chaos at bay. The discipline held back the flood of memory that wanted to drown him. Most days it worked. The mare lifted her head in the corral, ears swiveling toward the access road. She had caught something on the wind before Harlan's duller human senses registered the sound. He straightened, axe handle still warm against his palms. The horse stared east, toward the dirt track that wound 3 miles through lodgepole pines before meeting the county highway. Her nostrils flared. She stamped once. Unusual. The supply truck came Tuesdays. Mail arrived Wednesdays. Today was Friday, and nobody had business this far up the valley unless they were lost or looking for someone specific. Harlan set the axe against the woodpile and moved toward the cabin door. Mounted on pegs just inside hung a Remington 700 and .308 Winchester. The rifle was older than most current wars, its walnut stock worn smooth by thousands of repetitions. Harlan had carried it through the mountains of Afghanistan when Soviet landmines still waited in the frozen passes. Before that, it had belonged to his father, a different Marine in a different war. The Leupold Mark IV scope was newer, capable of resolving a man's face at 600 meters. Some tools never became obsolete. Some skills never dulled. The engine sound grew louder, laboring over ruts and exposed rock. Harlan stepped onto the porch with the rifle held low and ready. Not aimed, not threatening, just present. A vehicle emerged from the tree line, moving slowly, suspension working hard. Not a truck. A sedan. Dark blue, civilian plates thick with road dust. It pulled into the clearing and stopped 30 meters out. The engine died. Silence settled back over the valley, broken only by wind through the pines and the mare's nervous breathing. The driver's door opened with a creak of abused hinges. The man who emerged moved like someone whose skeleton had been shattered and poorly reassembled. He favored his left leg, dragging it slightly with each step. His right arm hung crooked. Blood had soaked through his jacket on the left side, a stain spreading dark across his ribs. He made it 2 steps from the vehicle before his legs failed. He caught himself on one knee, the good hand braced against gravel. Harlan knew him, not from the face which had gone gray with shock and blood loss, but from the way he carried himself even broken. From the tattoo visible where his sleeve had ridden up. Eagle, globe, and anchor, the mark that never faded. The brotherhood that never ended. Bobby Sullivan. They had called him Nomad in the old days. A man who could navigate by stars and terrain in the memory of landscapes he had only seen once. A man who had walked point on operations that officially never happened in countries where Americans officially never were. Sullivan took another step and collapsed, went down face first into the dirt. When he lifted his head, his eyes found Harlan, found the man he had come to warn. His voice came out destroyed, barely more than a rasp against the wind. Shepherd, they are killing us, one by one, all of us, because of Laos. The world split open. 2 shots, fired from distance, the sound reaching Harlan's ears after the bullets had already arrived. The first round entered high on Sullivan's back, punched through jacket and flesh and bone in a spray of red mist. The second caught him below the right shoulder blade, angled down toward vital organs. Sullivan pitched forward and went still. Harlan was moving before conscious thought engaged. He dropped behind the woodpile, bringing the Remington up, scanning the ridgeline to the southeast. The shots had come from elevation. 400 meters, maybe more. Professional distance, professional shot placement. Both rounds center mass fired within 1 second of each other. This was not luck. This was training. This was a shooter who knew his craft. Through the scope, Harlan glassed the high ground, movement, two figures in tactical gear already withdrawing. They moved in bounds, one covering while the other displaced, the dance of operators who had practiced together. Military discipline, current or former special operations. Either way, they were good. Harlan had the shot. The range was within his capability, even at 67. But they would be expecting return fire, would already be behind cover or preparing to return it. And even if he dropped one, the other would report back to whoever had sent them. Better to let them think their work was done. Better to play the shocked old man paralyzed by sudden violence, not the trained killer calculating angles and next moves. He held position until the figures disappeared into the timber. Held until he heard an engine start, distant and receding. Only then did he rise and cross the clearing to where Bobby Sullivan lay bleeding out on Montana gravel. Harlan rolled him over, knowing it was already finished. The exit wounds were catastrophic, massive trauma that no field medicine could address. Sullivan's eyes were open but losing focus, his breathing wet and labored. Sucking chest wound, both lungs compromised. Minutes at most, probably less. Harlan pulled him into a sitting position against the sedan's front wheel. The movement brought a sound from deep in Sullivan's chest, something between a cough and a sigh. His hand moved, trembling, reaching inside his jacket. Harlan helped, finding an inner pocket, withdrawing a piece of paper folded and refolded until the creases had begun to tear. The paper was stained with sweat and blood. Harlan unfolded it carefully. A list of names written in block capitals, 12 of them. 7 had been struck through with red ink. The rest waited. Harlan found his own name 11th on the list. The 12th and final name read Raymond Cole, Flagstaff, Arizona. Sullivan's hand found Harlan's wrist, the grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. His eyes cleared for a moment, consciousness rallying for one final push. "They know," he whispered. The words came out broken, separated by failing breaths. "About Laos, what really happened there. They are erasing us, before the truth comes out, before anyone can testify." "Who?" Harlan asked, leaning close. "Who is doing this?" Sullivan tried to answer, his mouth shaped words, but his lungs could not push air past them. The light began to fade from his eyes. His hand loosened on Harlan's wrist, fingers going slack. Bobby Sullivan, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, died at 0732 on a Friday morning in October, 41 years after he should have died in the jungles of Laos. Harlan closed the dead man's eyes, stayed kneeling beside the body for a long moment. Then he stood, the paper still in his hand, the list of names. He recognized everyone, men he had served with, men who had walked into hell together and somehow walked out again, men who knew things that powerful people wanted to stay buried. The past had finally caught up, and it had brought professional killers. Harlan carried Sullivan's body inside and laid it on the floor, covering it with a wool blanket. Calling the sheriff would accomplish nothing except complications. Local law enforcement would find 2 professional hits from extreme range, and they would have questions that Harlan could not answer. Not without opening classified files that had been sealed for 4 decades. Not without explaining operations that officially never existed. Not without talking about the night 8 Marines died because someone sold them to the enemy. He stood over the covered body, then turned away and began to move with purpose. The rifle went into a hard case. Spare magazines, boxed ammunition, cleaning kit. In the bedroom closet beneath a false floor sat a bag that had been packed since the day he bought this property. Cash in mixed denominations. 3 sets of identification, 2 legitimate and 1 that had never officially existed. A satellite phone with a contact list of numbers belonging to men in the same ghost category. A Glock 19 with 4 loaded magazines. Harlan changed from work clothes to tactical pants and a dark jacket. He moved with the efficiency of muscle memory, each action purposeful. This was not panic. This was protocol, the old machine remembering how to function under pressure. Before leaving, he went to the mantel above the cold fireplace. A single photograph stood there in a simple wood frame. 9 men in fatigues, young and hard, squinting against tropical sun somewhere in Southeast Asia. The photo had been taken in 1982, before the operation that would kill 8 of them. Harlan picked up the frame and studied the faces. Bobby Sullivan on the left, grinning. Raymond Cole in the center, holding a pocket Bible. David Mitchell beside him, one hand raised in a wave frozen across time. David Mitchell, the man who had pushed Harlan down behind cover when the ambush opened. The man who had taken the burst of automatic fire meant for Harlan's exposed back. The man whose 7-year-old daughter had stood beside a flag-draped coffin, not understanding why her father was never coming home. Harlan set the photograph face down on the mantel. Some debts could never be repaid, but they could be honored, and the men who had created those debts could be made to answer for them. The drive from Montana to Arizona took 14 hours with stops for fuel and the necessary avoidance of major highways where cameras might track his movements. Harlan drove through darkness, the Remington in its case behind the seat, his mind working over the problem like a puzzle with missing pieces. Someone was systematically eliminating survivors from Operation Crimson Dagger. 7 names crossed off. Sullivan made 8. 4 remained, including himself and Raymond Cole. The operation that never officially happened was becoming inconvenient for someone. Someone with resources. Someone with access to professional contractors. Someone who could not afford to have witnesses alive when whatever they were planning reached its conclusion. Harlan reached Flagstaff as the sun climbed toward noon. The gun shop Raymond Cole owned was dark, closed sign hanging behind dusty glass. The address Harlan had for Cole's residence was a trailer park on the eastern edge of town, where the high desert reasserted itself against human intrusion. Cole's trailer sat at the end of a dirt lane, a single wide unit with a small wooden porch and a rusted air conditioner mounted in one window. A truck from the previous decade occupied the gravel drive. Lights burned behind curtained windows. Harlan parked 2 blocks distant and approached on foot, moving between trailers, using shadows and the natural cover of deteriorating structures. Someone was watching Cole's trailer. Harlan spotted them from 30 meters out. 2 men in a dark sedan parked across the street, engine running, exhaust vapor visible in the cool desert air. They sat with professional stillness, not fidgeting, not talking unnecessarily. Surveillance or a kill team waiting for the word. Either way, they represented a problem. Harlan circled wide, coming up on the trailer from the rear. The back door stood unlocked. Inside, lights were on, but the space felt empty in the way occupied places never do. Harlan moved through the small kitchen with the Glock drawn and low, clearing corners, checking sight lines. Raymond Cole sat at the kitchen table. A bottle of whiskey stood in front of him, half empty, and a revolver lay on the scarred wood within easy reach. When Harlan appeared in the doorway, Cole did not look surprised. "Knew you would come, Shepherd," he said. His voice carried the rasp of damaged lungs. "Heard about Nomad on the scanner this morning. Montana State Police found a body at your property. They are calling you a person of interest." Harlan holstered the Glock and pulled out a chair. The scrape of wood on linoleum seemed loud in the quiet trailer. Cole looked like a man dying by degrees. His face had gone gaunt, skin stretched tight over bone with a yellow tinge that spoke of failing organs. His hands trembled slightly when he reached for the whiskey bottle. "How bad?" Harlan asked, though he already knew the answer. Cole smiled without humor, the expression more grimace than anything. "Cancer. Lungs. The doctors think Agent Orange, from all those years breathing defoliant spray in the jungle. Stage 4. They said 6 months back in June, but I figure 3, maybe less. Funny how it works, is it not? Survive the bullets and the ambushes and the operations that should have killed us, then get taken out by poison our own government spread on the trees." He poured 2 glasses and pushed one across to Harlan. "Survive all that," Cole continued, "and then get hunted down by our own people because we know too much. Because we saw what really happened in Laos, because we can testify that 8 good Marines died because someone sold us out." Harlan picked up the glass but did not drink. "There are 2 men watching your trailer, dark sedan across the street, professional-grade surveillance." Cole nodded slowly. "Been there since yesterday. Sentinel Group contractors, I am guessing. Private military. They handle the wet work for people who cannot afford official connections. I recognize the type, recognize the patience." He opened a drawer in the table and pulled out a thick folder, dropping it between them. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, printed documents. Harlan spread them across the table, scanning the contents. 7 dead in 6 months, Cole said, tapping the papers with one yellowed finger. Maybe 8 now with Sullivan, all of us from the Laos operation, all staged to look like accidents or natural causes, car crash, drowning, home invasion turned fatal, heart attack. But when you look close, when you actually examine the details, the pattern emerges. He indicated one photograph showing a man in his 60s lying on a morgue table. Thomas Hayes, found dead in his garage, carbon monoxide poisoning, ruled suicide. Except Hayes was left-handed and the suicide note was written with the right hand. And he had no history of depression. The man was a deacon at his church, for God's sake. Had grandchildren visiting every weekend. Harlan turned to another document, a police report. And this one, Cole continued, Martin Reeves fell down his basement stairs, broke his neck. Except the coroner found bruising on his upper arms consistent with being forcibly held. And there were scuff marks on the stairs indicating a struggle. But the local police closed it as accidental death, barely investigated at all. Cole took a long drink, then coughed, the sound wet and deep. When the fit passed, his eyes were watery but focused. Someone is erasing us, Shepard. Someone with resources and reach and connections. Someone who knows we are the last witnesses to what happened in Laos 41 years ago. And they are accelerating the timeline. Used to be 1 death every month. Now it is 1 every 2 weeks. Who, Harlan asked, though part of him already suspected. Cole opened the folder to the last page. A photograph, grainy and taken from distance, showed 2 men standing beside a car outside what looked like a private resort. One was perhaps 59, silver hair, expensive suit, the bearing of someone accustomed to power. The other was older, 70 maybe, with the posture of a man who expected deference and usually received it. The younger one, Cole said, is Deputy Director Thomas Keene, CIA. He was the case officer for Operation Crimson Dagger. He sent us into Laos in April of 1983, told us it would be a simple extraction mission, in and out, minimal contact expected. You remember how that turned out? And the older man, Harlan said, already knowing but needing to hear it confirmed, Senator Richard Ashford, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, currently the front-runner for the 2028 presidential race. Back in 1983, he was a lieutenant colonel in CIA Directorate of Operations. He was Keene's supervisor. He was the one who approved the mission, who provided the intelligence, who told us where to go and when. You think they sold us? Harlan said quietly. I know they did, Cole replied. He reached into the folder again and produced a single sheet, a photocopy of a bank statement so old the print had begun to fade. But the numbers were still legible. A wire transfer, $200,000, dated 2 weeks after the Laos operation. Origin account traced back to a shell corporation that Cole had connected to a Soviet front company operating out of Panama in the early 80s. Destination account held by Thomas Keene. Closed in 1984, 3 months after the deposit. Cole leaned back, the chair creaking under his diminished weight. Took me 2 years to find this, he said. Had a private investigator help, former FBI who knew how to dig through buried records. Found bank statements that should have been destroyed decades ago. Found connections that should have been severed. And you know what the worst part is? It was not about ideology, not about communism or belief or political conviction. It was about money. Keene sold us for $200,000, and Ashford helped him do it. Split the take and buried the evidence. Harlan set down the whiskey glass untouched. His hands were steady, but his jaw had gone tight, muscle jumping beneath weathered skin. 8 men died, he said, voice low and controlled. David Mitchell took 3 rounds through the chest because Prophet told us the landing zone was cold. Because Prophet said there would be no enemy contact. Because Prophet walked us straight into a prepared kill box, and the people waiting there knew exactly when we would arrive. Cole nodded. And now Prophet and the senator want to make sure no one ever finds out. Ashford is positioning for a presidential run. A scandal like this would destroy everything. Treason, selling American Marines to the enemy, getting them killed for profit. So they are cleaning house, eliminating the evidence. And we are the evidence, Shepard. We are the last men who can testify to what really happened. How much of this can you prove? Harlan asked, gesturing at the folder. Cole shrugged. Bank records. Witness statements from people who saw Keene with known Soviet contacts in Panama. Travel records showing Ashford made 3 trips to Panama between 1983 and 1904, right around the time these transactions were happening. It is circumstantial, it raises questions. But without someone who was there, someone who can put it all together and testify under oath, it is not enough for prosecution. He looked at Harlan, the weight of years and sickness and accumulated knowledge heavy in his gaze. Not enough without someone like you. Before Harlan could respond, the lights died. Total darkness, sudden, the kind that comes from power being cut rather than a breaker flipping. Harlan was already moving, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. He rolled out of the chair, reaching for Cole. The older man was moving too, despite his illness, grabbing the revolver from the table, his other hand finding a flashlight mounted beneath the counter. The back door exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and twisted metal. 4 men in tactical gear came through in a practice stack, night vision devices down, weapons up. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of operators who had trained together, each covering a sector, clearing the small space with professional speed. But they were expecting an old, sick man alone in a trailer. They were not expecting Jack Harlan. The first operative through the door caught Harlan's elbow across the bridge of his nose. The night vision goggles shattered. The man's head snapped back with the sound of breaking cartilage. Harlan stripped the rifle from suddenly nerveless hands and reversed it in one smooth motion, driving the buttstock into the second man's solar plexus. As that one folded, Harlan pivoted and brought the muzzle up under the third man's chin. The suppressed weapon coughed once. Cole fired the revolver twice, the reports deafening in the confined space. The fourth operative went down hard, his weapon clattering across cheap linoleum. Outside, someone shouted. More were coming. The assault team had not come alone. The front, Harlan snapped. They moved together, Cole grabbing a bag that had been positioned beside the refrigerator, Harlan providing cover. 2 more operatives were coming up the front steps, weapons raised. Harlan fired through the door, the suppressed rifle punching holes through aluminum. One man screamed, the other dove for cover. Cole's hand moved to a remote device. He pressed a button. The front yard erupted in a sequence of explosions that turned night into day. Claymore anti-personnel mines, the old kind from an older kind of war, daisy-chained in position to create overlapping kill zones. The 2 operatives on the steps were shredded. The ones coming up the driveway went down in a wave of steel balls moving at lethal velocity. Move, Cole rasped, blood flecking his lips. They went out the back, through the kitchen where bodies lay, into the desert night. Behind them, the trailer was already burning, flames from the explosions catching on curtains and cheap paneling. Sirens wailed in the distance, police responding to the gunfire and the blasts. Cole's truck was hidden 50 meters away, behind a cluster of mesquite. They reached it at a run, Cole wheezing with every breath, Harlan supporting him. The engine started on the first turn. They pulled onto the dirt road as the first police cruiser screamed past, heading toward the fire. Harlan drove north, away from Flagstaff, away from the lights and sirens and the bodies they had left behind. Cole sat slumped in the passenger seat, one hand pressed to his chest, breathing in short gasps. The go bag was at his feet. The folder of evidence was inside. After 10 minutes, Cole spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Ezekiel 25:17, he said. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the inequities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper. He turned his head to look at Harlan, and in the dashboard lights his face was gray. You are that man, Shepherd. You always were, the one who leads, the one who remembers. Do not let these bastards win. Do not let them erase what happened. Do not let David and the others die twice, once in that jungle, once in the lie that followed. Cole closed his eyes. His breathing grew more labored, the sound wet and broken. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth, darker than it should be. Something internal was failing, the cancer or the stress or both combining to accelerate the inevitable. Raymond Cole died 3 miles outside Flagstaff on a dark road under stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. He died in the passenger seat of his own truck with his hand on the folder that contained 2 years of investigation and the truth that powerful men wanted buried. His last word was a name, David. Harlan pulled over and sat in the darkness. Around them, the high desert stretched away to distant mountains, vast and empty, and indifferent to human drama. The only sound was the engine ticking as it cooled and the wind moving through sage and mesquite. He did not cry, had run out of tears somewhere in the long years after Laos, but he sat with the body of his friend and he made a promise in the silence. They would not die twice. The truth would come out, and the men who had sold 8 Marines for Soviet money would answer for every name on that list. 2 days later, Jack Harlan sat in a diner outside Albuquerque and waited. The establishment looked like it had not changed since 1975. Vinyl booths, a jukebox that still played actual records, a waitress who called everyone honey and moved like her feet hurt. Harlan had chosen it because it was public but not crowded, visible but not memorable, a place where 2 people could meet and talk without drawing attention. The bell over the door chimed. A woman walked in, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a navy suit that marked her as federal government. She scanned the room with automatic threat assessment, the kind of quick evaluation that came from training. Her eyes found Harlan. She walked to his booth and stood there for a moment, studying his face with an intensity that suggested she was comparing it to memory or photographs. "Colonel Harlan," she said, not a question, a statement of confirmed identity. Harlan gestured to the seat across from him. The woman slid into the booth, placing a leather portfolio on the table between them. Up close, Harlan could read more details. Wedding ring, no children yet, judging by the tailored fit of her suit and the lack of wear that comes from lifting and carrying. Early 30s, military bearing despite civilian clothes. And eyes that had seen violence, combat eyes. "Agent Sarah Mitchell," she said, "Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I have been trying to find you for 3 days, Colonel." "And now you have," Harlan replied. Sarah opened the portfolio and pulled out a file. Inside were photographs, crime scene images, bodies, locations Harlan recognized. Montana, Arizona. Other places where men from Operation Crimson Dagger had died in the last 6 months. "I am investigating a pattern," Sarah said, her voice controlled and professional. 8 men, all former Marines, all veterans of classified operations in Southeast Asia during the early 80s, all dead within the last 6 months. The deaths were ruled accidents or natural causes. But when you examine the actual evidence, instead of accepting official conclusions, you find inconsistencies. You find indicators of homicide staged to look like misadventure. She laid out another photograph. Bobby Sullivan, dead on Montana gravel. "This man was killed 2 days ago at a cabin registered to you. Local police consider you a person of interest. I think you know exactly who killed him and why." Harlan sipped his coffee. It was bitter and old, probably sitting on the burner for hours. "Why does NCIS care about dead retirees?" he asked. Sarah reached into the portfolio again. This time she pulled out a different photograph. Older, faded, 9 men in combat fatigues, squinting against harsh sunlight somewhere in Southeast Asia. "Because one of those men was my father," she said quietly. She pointed to a face in the center of the group. David Mitchell. The name hit Harlan like a physical blow. "I was 7 years old when he died," Sarah continued. "My mother told me it was a training accident. Classified location, classified circumstances. All she received was a flag and a check and a letter from the Marine Corps thanking her for his service. She drank herself to death by the time I was 16. I joined the Marines to understand who my father was. I became an investigator to find out what really happened to him." Her voice stayed level, but Harlan could see the emotion underneath, held back by will and training. "I have spent 3 years digging into this," Sarah said. "I know about Operation Crimson Dagger. I know about Laos. I know that 9 men went in and only 1 came back. I know the mission was classified at levels that still make it nearly impossible to access records. But I also know that someone is killing the survivors. And I know that you were there when my father died." She leaned forward, and for the first time, her professional mask cracked slightly. "I need to know what happened to my father, Colonel. I need to know the truth. And I think you need someone who can help you stop whoever is trying to erase that truth." Harlan looked at the photograph of David Mitchell, the young man waving at the camera, the young man who would be dead a year later, his chest torn open by bullets fired from jungle darkness. The young man who had pushed Harlan down and taken the fire meant for him. "Your father saved my life," Harlan said quietly. "He died because I was half a second too slow reacting when the shooting started. Because I believed the intelligence we were given and led my team into an ambush. 8 men died on my watch. Your father was one of them. That was not your fault, Sarah said. Harlan's hand tightened on the coffee cup. It was someone's fault. Your father and 7 other Marines died because someone sold us out. Because someone took money from the Soviets and gave them our mission details. Our route, our timing, our objective coordinates. We walked into a prepared kill zone. And the men who arranged that have spent 41 years covering it up. He pushed the cup away and met Sarah's eyes directly. Now they are eliminating witnesses. Raymond Cole is dead. Bobby Sullivan is dead. 6 others are dead. I am on the list. And they will not stop until everyone who knows the truth is gone. Sarah nodded slowly, her expression hardening with determination. Then we need to move first. We need to find evidence that cannot be ignored or suppressed. We need to expose them before they can eliminate you. Harlan studied her. Young, driven, capable, if her bearing and the way she carried herself were any indication. And she had resources, NCIS credentials, access to databases and files that a retired colonel could not reach. But she was also David Mitchell's daughter, the child of a man who had died in Harlan's place. Some debts could never be fully repaid, but perhaps they could be honored by helping the daughter finish what the father had died for. Harlan reached across the table and pulled the portfolio toward him. Inside were Sarah's investigation files. Names, dates, locations, connections drawn between deaths that should have been random but were not. It was thorough work, professional, the kind of investigation that took dedication and skill. There is a safe house, Harlan said, in the hills outside Washington. We can work from there, but you need to understand something before we go further. The people we are going after are not just murderers. They are powerful. They have resources, connections, reach. If we do this, there is no turning back. Your career will likely be destroyed. Your life might be forfeit. Sarah extended her hand across the table, her grip firm when Harlan took it. My career has been over since I started asking questions about classified operations, and my life stopped mattering the day I decided to find out who killed my father and why. Her eyes held his, unwavering. Let us finish this, she said. Let us make sure they did not die for nothing. Outside, the New Mexico sun beat down on cracked asphalt. Harlan paid for coffee that neither of them had finished and followed Sarah to her car. They would drive east, toward Virginia, toward the safe house where they could plan and prepare, toward the confrontation that had been building for 41 years. Because in a jungle in Laos in 1983, 8 men had been betrayed and murdered, and the men responsible had grown wealthy and powerful on that blood money. They had built careers. They had climbed to positions of influence. They believed themselves untouchable, protected by time and classification and the convenient death of witnesses. They were about to learn that some debts could not be buried, some ghosts could not be silenced, and some promises made over the bodies of fallen brothers could never be broken. Jack Harlan was coming for them and he was bringing the daughter of the man who had died saving him. The reckoning had begun. The safe house sat 40 miles outside Washington, D.C., hidden among rolling Virginia hills where old money kept estates behind stone walls and neighbors minded their own business. The house itself was unremarkable, a 2-story colonial with fading white paint and shutters that needed work. The kind of place that blended into the landscape. The kind of place where secrets could be kept without drawing questions. Sarah Mitchell drove them there in her personal vehicle, a 10-year-old Honda, with nothing to identify her as federal law enforcement. They arrived after midnight, the house dark except for a single light burning over the back door. Sarah used 3 different keys to get inside, each one unlocking a separate deadbolt. Old-school security, the kind that required physical presence and could not be defeated by remote hacking. Inside, the house smelled of dust and disuse. Furniture sat under cloth covers like sleeping ghosts. The refrigerator held only bottled water and military rations that were probably older than Sarah herself. But the basement told a different story. Sarah led Harlan down wooden stairs that creaked with each step. At the bottom was a steel door with a combination lock. She worked the dial from memory, numbers she had committed to mine years ago. The door swung open to reveal what had once been a root cellar and was now something else entirely. Communications equipment lined one wall. Satellite uplink, encrypted computers capable of accessing databases that should have been beyond reach. A gun safe containing weapons that were not standard NCIS issue. Maps covered another wall, pins and strings connecting locations across the eastern United States. In the center stood a large table covered in files and photographs and the accumulated evidence of years of solitary investigation. My father bought this house in 1980, Sarah said, turning on overhead lights that buzzed and flickered before steadying. He used it as a retreat when he needed to get away from the city. After he died, my mother could not bear to sell it. Too many memories. I inherited it when she passed. I have been using it to investigate his death for the last 3 years. She pulled the cloth cover off a chair and sat down, and for the first time since Harlan had met her, she allowed exhaustion to show in her shoulders and face. No one knows about this place, she continued. Not NCIS, not my colleagues, not anyone. It is off the books, off the grid. We can work here without being monitored or interrupted. Harlan set his rifle case against the wall and walked to the maps. Red pins marked locations, each one labeled with a name, each name belonging to one of the dead from Operation Crimson Dagger. Strings connected them to dates, to locations, to the men who might have ordered their deaths. You have been tracking this for 3 years, he said. How much do you actually know? Sarah stood and joined him at the wall. Her finger traced connections between pins, following threads of evidence that she had painstakingly gathered. I know that in April 1980, 9 Marines were sent into Laos on a mission designated Operation Crimson Dagger. The mission was classified at the highest levels. The objective was supposedly to extract a CIA asset who had been compromised. But when I cross-referenced available CIA records, I could not find any asset in that region at that time. No reports of an agent in trouble, no extraction request filed. It was as if the mission was created from thin air. She pointed to another section of the map where different colored pins clustered. I know that 8 of those 9 Marines died in an ambush, killed by Pathet Lao forces who seemed to know exactly where the team would be and when they would arrive. The only survivor was you. And I know that when you returned to base, you were debriefed by CIA personnel and then told to never speak of the operation again. The mission was scrubbed from official records. The men who died were listed as training accidents in classified locations. Their families were told comforting lies instead of hard truths. Harlan listened without interrupting. Sarah's voice was controlled, but he could hear the anger underneath, the fury of a daughter who had been lied to for 3 decades and was now forcing the truth into the light. I know that the case officer for the operation was Thomas Keene, Sarah continued, currently deputy director of the CIA. And I know that his superior officer at the time was Richard Ashford, now a United States Senator and chairman of the Armed Services Committee. Both men have had long, successful careers. Both have profited greatly from their positions. Both have everything to lose if the truth about Laos comes out. She turned to face Harlan directly. What I do not know is why. Why set up a team to be ambushed? Why betray 9 of your own men? What could possibly be worth that? Harlan walked to the table and sat down in one of the uncovered chairs. The wood creaked under his weight. He was silent for a long moment, his mind returning to that night in Laos. The darkness, the sudden eruption of gunfire, David Mitchell's blood on his hands. $200,000, he said finally, his voice flat. That is what Raymond Cole found, a wire transfer from a Soviet front company to an account controlled by Thomas Keene. Dated 2 weeks after the operation, payment for services rendered, payment for 9 American lives. Sarah's face went pale. She gripped the edge of the table. They sold you, sold all of you, for money. Keene sold us, Harlan corrected. But he did not act alone. Someone higher up had to approve the operation. Someone had to provide the mission details to the Soviets. Someone had to make sure the investigation afterward was shut down and buried. That someone was Richard Ashford. He was Keene's supervisor. He split the take. And he has spent 41 years making sure nobody finds out. He pulled out the folder that Cole had died protecting and spread its contents across the table. Bank records, photographs, connections traced through years of painstaking research. The story of betrayal told in documents that could not be argued away. This is what got Cole killed, Harlan said. This is what they are trying to erase. Because if this becomes public, if the American people learn that a sitting senator and the deputy director of the CIA committed treason 40 years ago and sold Marines to the enemy, it destroys them both. Ashford's presidential ambitions end. Keene goes to prison. Maybe both of them face execution for treason. Sarah picked up one of the photographs showing Keene and Ashford together at some recent political event. Both men smiling, both looking prosperous and comfortable. Men who had never faced consequences for their actions. So they are killing the witnesses, Sarah said quietly, Everyone who knows what really happened in Laos. Everyone who can testify against them. Everyone who represents a threat, Harlan agreed. Sullivan, Cole, 6 others in the last 6 months. I am number 11 on the list, and they will not stop until we are all dead and the truth is buried with us. Sarah set down the photograph and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved rapidly across the screen, accessing databases that required federal credentials and clearances that probably did not extend to what she was doing. If they are using contractors to do the killing, she said, there will be a money trail. Communications, organizational connections. Cole mentioned Sentinel Group. Let me see what I can find. She worked in focused silence for 10 minutes. Her training evident in the efficient way she navigated through layers of protected information. Harlan watched her and saw David Mitchell in the determination of her expression, in the set of her jaw. The father's spirit living on in the daughter's mission. Finally, Sarah looked up, her expression grim. Sentinel Group is a private military corporation based in Virginia. On paper, they provide security services, training programs, risk management consultation, government contracts, corporate clients, all seemingly legitimate. But when you dig deeper into the financials, there are inconsistencies, payments that do not match the reported services, personnel with backgrounds in special operations, but no clear current assignments. Shell companies layered on shell companies. It is a front for something darker. A kill team, Harlan said. Sarah nodded. And they are well funded. I can trace some of the money back to political action committees associated with Richard Ashford's campaign. Not directly, the connections are deliberately obscured, but they are there if you know how to look. She pulled up a map on her phone, showing a location outside Richmond. This is their headquarters, a compound in rural Virginia. 50 acres, private security, restricted access. If we want to know who is giving the orders and how deep this conspiracy goes, we need to get inside that facility. Harlan studied the map. The compound was isolated, defensible, the kind of location that would have overlapping security measures and trained personnel. A direct assault would be suicide for 2 people, no matter how skilled. We need leverage, he said. Something to force them into making a mistake. Something that will make them reveal themselves. Sarah thought for a moment, then her expression shifted as an idea formed. I have access, she said, NCIS credentials. I can request a meeting with Thomas Keene. Tell him I am investigating the pattern of deaths among former special operations personnel and that I have uncovered evidence of a conspiracy. Imply that I know more than I actually do, and watch how he reacts. If he is guilty, he will panic, Harlan said, following her logic. He will reach out to Ashford. He will contact Sentinel Group. And when he does, we can track those communications. It is a gamble, Sarah admitted. If he suspects I am working with you, if he thinks this is a trap, he might just have me killed as well. Then we make sure you are not alone, Harlan replied. I will provide overwatch. If this turns into an ambush, I will have approximately 4 seconds to intervene before you are dead. But 4 seconds is enough if I am in position. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Sarah used her NCIS authority to request a consultation meeting with Deputy Director Keene regarding an ongoing investigation. The request went through official channels, documented and traceable. Keene agreed, probably out of curiosity, probably wanting to assess how much she had discovered. The meeting was scheduled at a coffee shop in Arlington, 3 blocks from CIA headquarters. Public location, neutral ground. The kind of place where a federal agent might meet with a senior intelligence official for an informal discussion. Harlan arrived 6 hours early and established his position in a rented office space on the 3rd floor of a building across the street. The office had a clear view of the coffee shop entrance. He set up the Remington on a makeshift rest near the window, the scope trained on the door. If Keene brought security, if this became a kill operation, Harlan would see it developing and could respond. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. 1 word, incoming. A black SUV pulled up outside the coffee shop. 2 men in suits exited first, executive protection officers scanning the street with practiced efficiency. Then Thomas Keene emerged from the back seat. He was 59 but looked younger, the benefits of wealth and access to premium healthcare evident in his appearance. Gray suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Silver hair perfectly styled. He moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected nations and never faced consequences for being wrong. Harlan watched through the scope as Keene entered the coffee shop. The 2 bodyguards took up positions outside, one at the door, one by the vehicle. Standard protective formation. They were competent but not expecting trouble. This was routine for them. Their principal meeting with a federal agent who was asking inconvenient questions, something Keene had handled countless times before in his long career. Inside the coffee shop, Sarah stood to greet Keene. Through the window, Harlan could see but not hear the exchange. Sarah's body language projected confidence and authority. Keene played the role of the concerned public servant, willing to help but slightly inconvenienced. They sat. Sarah produced a folder and laid out photographs on the table. Harlan recognized them even at this distance. The photos of dead MACV-SOG veterans, the evidence of a pattern that pointed to conspiracy and murder. Keene's expression did not change as he examined each photograph. He looked at them with apparent polite interest, the way someone might review documents that were mildly relevant to their area of responsibility. When Sarah finished her presentation, he said something brief. Sarah responded. The conversation continued for 5 minutes. Then Keene stood. He said something else, his tone final, and turned toward the exit. The meeting was over, less than 10 minutes. He was not taking the bait, not showing panic or concern, playing it perfectly calm and controlled. Harlan watched Keene exit the coffee shop and climb back into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away and disappeared into Arlington traffic. Sarah remained at the table, her posture rigid with frustration. She looked up toward the building where Harlan waited and gave a small shake of her head. Nothing, no reaction, no visible concern. Harlan disassembled the rifle and packed it away. By the time he reached the coffee shop, Sarah was outside, walking toward her car. He fell into step beside her without speaking until they were both inside the vehicle with the doors closed. Nothing, Sarah said, her voice tight with frustration. He looked at the evidence like it was mildly interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. Told me that these men were heroes who had given their lives for their country and that it was unfortunate they had died, but he had no information about any conspiracy. Then he thanked me for my diligence and left. Harlan opened the car door but did not get out. They sat in the parking space with the engine running. He is too controlled, Sarah continued, too calm. A normal person, even a guilty one, would show some kind of reaction. Surprise, concern, defensiveness, something. But Keene showed nothing, like he was expecting this conversation. Because he probably was, Harlan said. He has been waiting for someone to start connecting these dots. He has likely had responses prepared for years, scenarios rehearsed. We are not the first people to come looking for answers about classified operations from the 80s. So what now, Sarah asked. Now we wait, Harlan replied. And we watch. Because no matter how calm Keene appeared, he will report this meeting. He will tell Ashford. And they will have to decide how to respond. That is when they will make mistakes. The response came faster than expected. 6 hours after the meeting, Sarah's phone buzzed with an alert from the tracking software she had installed to monitor specific communication patterns. Keene's phone had made a call, not to Ashford directly, too obvious, but to a number that her database search traced to a law firm that represented Sentinel Group. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Sarah could not access the actual content, but the metadata told its own story. Immediately after Keene's call ended, the law firm number called another number. That phone was registered to a Colonel Ethan Brennan, listed as a consultant for Sentinel Group. A quick background search revealed former JSOC, multiple combat deployments, exemplary service record. Sarah looked at Harlan across the safe house table, where they had returned to analyze the communications data. They know I am asking questions, she said. They are activating their response protocol. Brennan is probably being tasked with assessing the threat and neutralizing it. Then we need to identify Brennan and get to him before he gets to us, Harlan replied. We need to understand who he is and what leverage Ashford has over him. Good soldiers do not become contract killers without a reason. Sarah used her NCIS access to pull Brennan's full military record. The file painted a picture of a dedicated officer who had given decades to his country. Multiple combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, Bronze Star with V, device for valor, Purple Heart, a career built on sacrifice and service. There has to be a reason he is working for them, Sarah said, reading through the record. Men like this do not just turn into assassins for hire. Everyone has a pressure point, Harlan observed. Something they care about more than their own honor. For some men it is money, for others power, and for some it is family. He pointed to a section of the file listing next of kin. Ethan Brennan had a younger sister. Emily Brennan, age 45, current address in Richmond, Virginia. You think they are using her against him? Sarah said, understanding immediately. I think a man like Brennan does not work for traitors unless someone is holding a gun to his head, Harlan replied. Or to someone else's head, someone he loves. The easiest way to control a good man is to threaten the people he cannot bear to lose. They sat in silence, considering the implications. If Brennan was being coerced, if he was as much a victim as the men he had been ordered to kill, then the situation was more complicated than simple heroes and villains. But complicated did not mean unsolvable. It just meant they needed to think several moves ahead. We need to talk to him, Sarah said finally. Harlan shook his head. Brennan is a professional. He will be cautious, paranoid even. If we approach him directly, he will assume it is a trap. We need to make him come to us. We need to create a situation where he has no choice but to make contact. How? Sarah asked. We threaten what he is protecting, Harlan said. We make him think his sister is in danger. Not from us, from his employers. We make him choose between following orders and saving family. Sarah picked up her phone and made a call. It rang 6 times before someone answered. A woman's voice. Cautious. This is Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, Sarah said, her tone professional and concerned. I am trying to reach Emily Brennan. This is Emily, the woman replied, and now there was fear in her voice. What is this about? Is my brother okay? Your brother is fine as far as I know, Sarah said. But I am calling because we have received information about a possible threat to your safety. We have observed suspicious activity near your residence. Individuals with potential hostile intent. I cannot provide more details on an unsecured line, but I would recommend you consider staying with friends or family for the next few days as a precaution. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Emily spoke, her voice shaking. What kind of threat? Who would want to hurt me? I cannot discuss specifics, Sarah replied, maintaining her professional tone. But your brother's recent professional associations may have put you at risk. I am advising extreme caution. If you see anything suspicious, call 911 immediately. She ended the call and set the phone down. Harlan was watching her with an expression that might have been approval. If Brennan cares about his sister, he will check on her tonight, Harlan said. And when he does, we will be waiting. They drove to Richmond that evening and positioned themselves near Emily Brennan's house, a modest single-family home in a middle-class neighborhood. Harlan and Sarah found observation points with clear lines of sight to all approaches and settled in to wait. If Brennan was going to come, it would be after dark, after he had confirmed that his sister was actually concerned. 2 hours passed. The neighborhood grew quiet as lights went out in houses up and down the street. Harlan waited with the patience that came from decades of surveillance operations in hostile territory. Sarah was less comfortable, shifting position every few minutes, checking her phone for messages that did not come. Then, at 11:30, a vehicle appeared. Not flashy or obvious, a dark sedan with local plates. It drove slowly past Emily's house once, the driver assessing the situation. Then it circled the block and parked 4 houses away. A man got out, tall and fit, moving with controlled precision that marked him as military even in civilian clothes. He walked toward Emily's house, but not on the sidewalk. He moved through yards, using shadows and natural cover, approaching the way someone trained in tactical movement would approach a potential threat. Ethan Brennan. Harlan and Sarah watched as he reached the house and began checking windows, looking for signs of forced entry or surveillance. He moved methodically, professionally, doing exactly what Harlan would have done in his position. After 5 minutes, apparently satisfied that the house was secure, he went to the back door and knocked softly. A light came on inside. Emily opened the door, still in nightclothes, her face showing relief and confusion in equal measure. She and Brennan spoke for a moment, their voices too low to hear. Then she stepped aside and let him enter. Harlan rose from his position. Sarah followed. They moved quickly, crossing the distance to the house. Harlan went to the back door while Sarah covered the front. If Brennan tried to run, they would have him boxed with no escape route. Harlan did not knock. He tested the handle and found it unlocked. Brennan's mistake in his concern for his sister. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, the Glock drawn and ready. The kitchen was empty, but voices came from the living room. Harlan moved toward them, staying quiet, staying low. In the doorway, he paused. Brennan stood with his back to the entrance, facing his sister. Emily was crying, asking him what was happening. why NCIS had called about threats. Brennan was trying to calm her, telling her it was probably nothing, just a precaution. He did not hear Harlan enter, did not know he was compromised until Harlan's voice cut through the conversation. "Hello, Ethan." Brennan spun, his hand going instinctively toward his waistband where a pistol was holstered. But Harlan already had him covered, the Glock aimed center mass. "Do not," Harlan said quietly. Brennan froze. His eyes took in Harlan, processed the threat, calculated options. His hand moved slowly away from the weapon. "Colonel Harlan," Brennan said, and his voice was controlled, but Harlan could hear the tension underneath. "I wondered when you would find me." Emily screamed. Harlan ignored her, his focus entirely on Brennan. "Tell your sister to sit down," Harlan said. "Tell her this does not concern her. Tell her she is not in danger." Brennan turned to Emily, his voice gentle despite the circumstances. "Em, please, sit down. This is between me and him. You are safe, I promise." Emily looked between her brother and the armed man in her living room. She was terrified, but she trusted Brennan. She sat on the couch, pulling a blanket around herself like armor. Brennan turned back to Harlan. "What do you want?" "The truth," Harlan replied. "I want to know why a decorated officer is working for men who committed treason. I want to know why you are hunting down veterans who did nothing except survive an operation where they were betrayed by their own government." Brennan's jaw tightened. "You do not understand the situation." "Then explain it to me." Sarah entered through the front door, her service weapon drawn. She positioned herself to cover Brennan from a different angle. Brennan glanced at her, assessing the tactical situation. Two armed opponents, his sister as a complication. No good options. He let out a long breath and his shoulders sagged slightly. The fight went out of him. "They have evidence," Brennan said quietly, "from Iraq. 2007, my unit was clearing a village outside Ramadi. There was a firefight. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. 4 dead, 2 of them children. I wrote the after-action report. I said they were insurgents, casualties of legitimate combat operations. But that was not the complete truth." His voice went flat, reciting facts he had buried for years. "My men panicked when shooting started. They fired without proper target identification. By the time I regained control of the situation, innocent people were dead. I covered it up, changed the evidence, told my men to stick to the official story, because if the truth came out, my career was finished. Court-martial, prison, disgrace. So I made it disappear." "And Ashford knows," Harlan said. Brennan nodded. "Someone from my unit talked years later. Went to a journalist. The story was about to break. Then suddenly it did not, because Richard Ashford made it go away, made the journalist back off, made the evidence vanish. And in return, I owe him. Forever." "So he owns you," Sarah said from her position by the door. Brennan looked at her. "Yes, he owns me. When he told me to take a consultant position with Sentinel Group, to handle what he called security operations, I did it, because the alternative was losing everything. My career, my freedom, my reputation, everything I had built over 20 years of service. Including your sister," Harlan added. Brennan's face hardened. He made that very clear. If I refused to cooperate, Emily would have an accident, a home invasion, a mugging that went wrong. He has the resources and the people to make it happen and make it look random. And I would spend the rest of my life knowing I could have prevented it. The room fell silent. Emily sat on the couch, tears running down her face as she heard her brother confess to sins she had never imagined. Sarah lowered her weapon slightly, her expression conflicted. Even Harlan felt something that might have been sympathy for a good man trapped by his own mistakes. "How many?" Harlan asked. "How many men have you killed for them?" Brennan closed his eyes. 7. Cole was supposed to be the 8th, but he fought back. Killed 3 of my team. After that, Ashford told me to accelerate the timeline. Finish the remaining targets before anyone else started connecting the pattern. "And me," Harlan said. "Am I next?" "You were," Brennan replied, "until you disappeared from Montana. Now Ashford wants you taken alive. He wants to know what you have shared. Who else knows about Laos?" He is getting nervous, especially after that NCIS agent met with Keene today. He thinks you are building a case. "He is right," Sarah said. Brennan opened his eyes and looked at her. "Then you are both going to die, because Ashford will not let this become public. He is too close to the presidency, too close to ultimate power. He will burn everything down before he lets his past destroy his future." Harlan lowered the Glock but did not holster it. "Unless we destroy him first," Harlan said. "Unless we expose what Keene and Ashford did. Unless we make the truth so public that killing us becomes impossible without confirming everything we have said. Brennan stared at him. You cannot touch them. They have too much protection, too many allies in the intelligence community and on Capitol Hill. Even if you manage to kill them, others will take their place. The system protects its own. Maybe, Harlan said, but the system also responds to public exposure, to evidence that cannot be suppressed, to testimony that cannot be ignored. If we can prove what Keene and Ashford did in Laos, if we can show the world that they committed treason and sold American lives, the system will turn on them to protect itself, because institutions hate embarrassment more than they hate truth. Sarah stepped forward. We have evidence, bank records, communication intercepts, a pattern of deaths that leads directly to Sentinel Group and through them to Ashford. What we need is testimony, someone who can confirm the chain of command, someone who can put Ashford and Keene together with the kill orders. She looked at Brennan directly. Someone like you. Brennan laughed bitterly. Testify against them. You mean sign my own death warrant? And Emily's. The moment I go public, we are both dead. Not if we move fast enough, Sarah said. Not if we expose everything at once. In public, on the record, where killing us becomes impossible without proving everything we have alleged. How? Brennan demanded. Senate hearing, Harlan said. Armed Services Committee. Public testimony, televised, with evidence submitted into the congressional record. Once it is out there, once the world is watching, they cannot make it disappear. They cannot kill their way out of exposure. Brennan shook his head. Ashford chairs that committee. He would never allow it. He will not have a choice if another senator demands an emergency hearing based on evidence of treason within the intelligence community, Sarah replied. And I know someone who will make exactly that demand. Senator Patricia Drummond from Montana. She has been pushing for investigations into how the government treats retired service members. If we bring her evidence of veterans being assassinated to cover up old crimes, she will act. Brennan was silent for a long moment. Emily had stopped crying. She sat motionless, watching her brother, waiting for him to make a choice between survival and honor. Finally, Brennan spoke. If I do this, if I testify, you have to protect Emily. Get her into witness protection, federal custody, somewhere Ashford cannot reach her. Sarah nodded. We can arrange that. NCIS has protocols for protecting witnesses in organized crime cases. This qualifies. Brennan looked at his sister. You would have to disappear for a while. Go somewhere I cannot know about. Somewhere no one can find you. Can you do that? Emily stood and walked to her brother. She took his hands in hers. I can do that if it means you stop killing people, she said quietly. If it means you get to stop living like this. If it means you can be the man Dad raised you to be. Brennan pulled her into an embrace. When he stepped back, his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. I will do it, he said to Harlan and Sarah. I will testify. I will give you everything I have. Names, dates, recordings, the complete structure of the operation. But you have to move fast. The moment Ashford realizes I have turned, he will come for all of us with everything he has. Harlan holstered the Glock and extended his hand. Brennan looked at it for a moment, then shook it. The grip was firm, a soldier's acknowledgement, an understanding between men who had both compromised their honor and were now trying to find a path back to redemption. We leave Richmond before dawn, Harlan said. Sarah will arrange Emily's protective custody. You come with me to the safe house, and you start writing down everything you know, every order, every target, every conversation with Ashford. We build an airtight case and we present it before he can stop us. Brennan nodded. He turned to Emily one more time. I love you, he said. Whatever happens, remember that. Remember that I tried to make this right. I know, Emily replied. I have always known. Now go finish it. They left Richmond in 3 vehicles. Sarah took Emily to a federal facility where she would be processed into witness protection. Harlan and Brennan drove together in the Honda, heading back to the Virginia hills where the safe house waited. On the way, Brennan made a phone call to Ashford. He kept his voice normal, reporting that he had checked on his sister and found no evidence of actual threats. He said NCIS was probably just being overly cautious after the recent veteran deaths. He made himself sound unconcerned, under control, the performance of a man who was still loyal. Ashford accepted the report and gave new orders. Find Harlan, bring him in for interrogation, and eliminate anyone helping him. When Brennan ended the call, he looked at Harlan. He believed me. For now. But he will start to suspect soon. Ashford always does. He has survived this long by trusting no one. Then we work fast, Harlan said. At the safe house, Brennan sat down and began to write, page after page of testimony. Every kill order he had received, every target he had eliminated, every conversation with Ashford where the senator had made it clear that loyalty meant silence and betrayal meant death. The handwriting was precise, mechanical. The careful script of a man documenting his own damnation and trying to balance the scales. Sarah returned 6 hours later, confirming that Emily was in federal custody and would be relocated to a secure facility under a new identity. Brennan nodded, accepting that he might never see his sister again. The price of redemption was often measured in what you gave up, not what you gained. Together, the three of them compiled evidence: financial records, communication logs, testimony, photographs. Everything was cross-referenced and documented. Everything was prepared for the moment when they would need to present it to people who had the power to act. Senator Drummond agreed to meet with them. She arrived at the safe house the following evening, a woman in her late 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that had attended too many military funerals. She listened to their evidence, read the documents, watched the video recordings where Ashford coldly discussed the elimination of witnesses. When they finished, she looked at each of them in turn. This hearing will happen in 5 days, she said. I will invoke emergency session rules. Ashford will try to block it, but he cannot without raising more suspicions. And once you begin testifying under oath, it becomes part of the permanent congressional record. It cannot be erased or classified after the fact. She stood, preparing to leave. Gather your evidence, prepare your testimony, and understand that these next 5 days will be the most dangerous of your lives. They will try to stop you. They will try to kill you. Do not give them the opportunity. After she left, Harlan, Sarah, and Brennan looked at each other. 5 days, 120 hours. A countdown to the moment when 41 years of lies would finally be exposed to sunlight. 5 days before the reckoning. The 72 hours before the Senate hearing moved like a nightmare in slow motion. Time stretched and compressed, each minute feeling like an hour while entire days vanished in the blink of an eye. Harlan knew this feeling, had lived it before in the hours before combat operations when the planning was done and all that remained was the waiting. The terrible, endless waiting while your mind ran through every scenario, every way the mission could go wrong, every face that might not make it home. Sarah worked without sleep, compiling evidence into a presentation that could not be ignored. She cross-referenced bank statements with classified operation logs that she had no legal authority to access but accessed anyway. She built timelines showing the correlation between Ashford's political ascension and the deaths of men who knew his secrets. She created a web of connections so dense and irrefutable that even the most skeptical observer would have to acknowledge the pattern. Brennan spent his time writing, page after page of testimony, names, dates, locations, every kill order he had received, every target he had eliminated, every conversation with Ashford where the senator had made it clear that loyalty meant silence and betrayal meant death. His handwriting was precise, almost mechanical, the careful script of a man documenting his own damnation. Harlan cleaned weapons. The Remington came apart and went back together. The Glock was field stripped, inspected, reassembled. Magazines were loaded and unloaded. The rituals of preparation. The familiar motions that kept his hands busy while his mind stayed sharp. Because he knew, even if Sarah and Brennan did not yet fully understand, that the hearing was not the end of this. It was the beginning of something else, something that would require more than words. On the second night, Sarah found him on the porch of the safe house, sitting in the darkness with the Remington across his knees. She sat down beside him without speaking. For a long time, they watched the stars wheel slowly across the Virginia sky. "Do you think he will come?" Sarah asked finally. "Ashford, do you think he will try to stop us before the hearing?" Harlan nodded slowly. "He has to. Once we testify, once that testimony enters the public record, he is finished. His only play is to prevent us from reaching the Senate chamber. And he has 3 days to make that happen." Sarah absorbed this. "Then we need protection, federal marshals, a security detail." "No," Harlan said quietly. "Anyone we bring in is another potential leak. Another person who might be on Ashford's payroll. We trust no one except the three of us, and we prepare for the worst." "What does that mean?" Harlan looked at her. In the starlight, he could see David Mitchell's features in her face. The same straight nose, the same determined set to the jaw. The daughter carrying her father's legacy forward into a fight he had not lived to finish. "It means we assume they are coming," Harlan said. "It means we prepare this place for a siege. And it means that if it comes to it, we fight our way to that hearing, even if we have to go through every Sentinel operative Ashford can throw at us." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, show me what to do." They spent the next day fortifying the safe house. Harlan had learned defensive tactics in places where help was never coming, and survival meant making the enemy pay for every inch of ground. He showed Sarah how to create overlapping fields of fire, how to use furniture as improvised barricades, how to set up fallback positions so that if one room was compromised, they could retreat to another without being cut off. Brennan contributed his own expertise. He knew how Sentinel teams operated because he had trained most of them. He knew their standard tactics for assaulting a fortified position. He explained how they would approach, where they would stage, what weapons they would bring, and he helped prepare countermeasures for each likely scenario. By the third morning, the safe house had been transformed. Tripwires ran across approaches. Cameras monitored all access routes. Weapons were staged at key positions. It was not impregnable. Nothing was. But it would make any assault costly, and cost was a deterrent even for professional killers. The call came at 1400 hours on the third day. Senator Drummond's office confirming that the hearing had been scheduled for 0900 the following morning. Emergency session, Armed Services Committee, open to the public and press. Ashford had tried to block it, claiming the matter involved classified information that could not be discussed in open forum. But Drummond had outmaneuvered him, invoking committee rules that allowed any member to demand an emergency hearing on matters of national security. The vote had been close, but she had won. After Sarah hung up, she turned to Harlan and Brennan. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "We have less than 24 hours. Then tonight is when they will come," Harlan replied. Brennan agreed. "Ashford knows the timeline now. He knows that once we enter that Senate chamber, it is over for him. This is his last chance to stop us, and he will take it." They prepared in silence, checked weapons, reviewed defensive positions, went over the plan one more time. If the assault came, their objective was not to win. It was to survive long enough for dawn, long enough to make it to Washington, long enough to tell the truth before witnesses who could not be silenced. Darkness fell. The safe house sat quiet in the Virginia hills, lights burning in the windows. 3 people inside waiting for violence to find them. And in the shadows beyond the property line, violence was indeed coming. The first sign was the dogs. The neighbors' dogs, half a mile down the valley, began barking at 2200 hours. Not the casual bark of dogs who had heard a deer or a raccoon. The sustained, aggressive barking of dogs who sensed multiple intruders in their territory. The barking lasted 5 minutes. Then it stopped abruptly. Too abruptly. Harlan was on the second floor watching through night vision binoculars. He saw them coming up the access road. 6 vehicles moving without lights, spaced at intervals. They stopped a quarter mile from the safe house and men began dismounting. Harlan counted shadows. 12, 15, 20. More than he had expected. More than Ashford should have been able to mobilize on short notice. Unless he had been planning this for days. Unless he had known from the moment Sarah met with Keene that this confrontation was inevitable. Harlan keyed the radio. "Sarah, Brennan, we have multiple contacts. 20 plus. Full tactical gear. They are staging for assault." Sarah's voice came back, calm despite what the words meant. "Understood. Positions." They moved to their assigned stations. Sarah took the ground floor rear, covering approaches from the forest. Brennan positioned himself in the kitchen with clear lines of fire through the windows. Harlan remained on the second floor where he could provide overwatch and long-range fire. The assault team took their time. Professional. Cautious. They knew who was inside the house, knew that at least one of the defenders was a trained sniper. They would not rush in blindly. Instead, they began with suppression. At 22:15, the windows on the south side of the house shattered inward as flashbangs detonated. The explosions were meant to disorient, to overwhelm the senses, to make the defenders panic. But Harlan and the others had been expecting this. They had stuffed their ears with foam plugs and worn shooting glasses to protect against the flash. The grenades were loud and bright, but not incapacitating. Return fire came immediately. Harlan put 3 rounds through the window, aiming at muzzle flashes in the darkness. He saw one shadow fall, the others scattered, seeking cover behind trees and vehicles. The firefight escalated. Incoming rounds punched through the walls of the safe house, old wood and plaster offering minimal protection. Harlan displaced from his position, moving to a new window, firing again. 2 more rounds, another target down. But there were so many. For every one he hit, 3 more seemed to appear. Downstairs, Sarah fired controlled bursts from her position. She had an M4 carbine that Brennan had brought from Sentinel's own armory. Sweet irony, using their weapons against them. Her shooting was precise, economical. No wasted ammunition, each trigger pull deliberate. Brennan held the kitchen, his sector the most exposed. Operatives were trying to flank through the backyard, using the darkness and the terrain. Brennan met them with automatic fire, short bursts that walked across their approach route. 2 men went down, the others retreated. But retreat was temporary. The assault team had numbers and equipment, and the cold willingness to trade casualties for objectives. They regrouped and came again. This time they used smoke, canisters launched from grenade launchers, arcing over the house, landing in the yard. Thick white smoke billowed out, obscuring vision, turning the night into a blind maze. Harlan switched to thermal optics, but the smoke degraded even that. He could see heat signatures moving through the haze, but could not identify targets with certainty. "They are coming through the smoke," Brennan called out. "Multiple targets, all sides." Harlan made a decision. He triggered the first defensive surprise. In the yard, concealed in the flower beds and along the walkways, were claymore mines that Brennan had liberated from Sentinel's inventory. Old-school anti-personnel weapons, 700 steel balls per mine, detonated by command wire. Harlan pressed the initiator. The mines detonated in sequence, a rolling wave of explosions that turned the smoke orange with fire and tore through the advancing assault team. Screams rose above the gunfire. Men fell, shredded by steel, moving at 4,000 feet per second. The assault faltered, but it did not stop. The survivors pushed through, driven by orders or fear, or the simple mathematics that stopping in the kill zone meant death. They reached the house and began breaching. The back door exploded inward, blown off its hinges by a shaped charge. The front windows were smashed by men swinging breaching tools. The assault team poured inside. Sarah fell back from her position, retreating up the stairs toward the second-floor strongpoint. She fired as she moved, dropping 2 operatives who came through the doorway behind her. But more kept coming, always more. Brennan was driven out of the kitchen by overwhelming fire. He threw his last flashbang and used the distraction to reach the stairwell. Took the stairs 3 at a time while bullets chewed apart the walls around him. They met Harlan in the second-floor hallway. The 3 of them, bloody and breathing hard, falling back to the final defensive position, a bedroom at the end of the hall that Harlan had converted into a last-stand bunker. Reinforced door, overlapping fields of fire, 1 small window for emergency egress, if it came to that. They piled into the room. Harlan slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. Immediately, gunfire hammered against the door. The wood held, barely. They had minutes at most. "We cannot hold here," Brennan said. "There are too many." "We do not need to hold," Harlan replied. "We just need to survive until dawn." It was 2,300 hours, 10 hours until the hearing, 10 hours that suddenly seemed like an eternity. Sarah was at the window, looking out at the chaos below. Fire had broken out in one section of the house where a grenade had ignited curtains. Smoke poured from the first floor. In the yard, bodies lay where the claymores had found them. But the survivors were regrouping, preparing for a final push. Then Sarah saw something that changed everything. Vehicle approaching, she called out, from the main road, moving fast. Harlan joined her at the window. Through the smoke and fire, he could see headlights. A single vehicle, civilian sedan, racing up the access road toward the chaos. It should have been reinforcements for the assault team, but something was wrong. The vehicle was not slowing, was not stopping at the staging area where the assault team had parked. Instead, it accelerated. The sedan slammed into the clustered assault vehicles with the sound of tearing metal and shattering glass. The impact triggered the fuel tank of one of the tactical trucks. It exploded in a fireball that lit up the night like noon. The explosion caught 3 assault team members who had been using the vehicles for cover. They went down burning. The sedan's door opened and a figure stumbled out. Harlan raised his binoculars. The figure was familiar, too familiar. Thomas Keene, the deputy director of the CIA, was here. At the assault, bleeding from a head wound, his expensive suit torn and dirty, but alive and moving. He stumbled away from the burning vehicles and raised his hands, shouting something that Harlan could not hear over the gunfire and the roar of flames. "What is he doing?" Sarah asked. Harlan did not answer. He was watching, trying to understand. The assault team had stopped firing. They were looking at Keene, looking at the burning vehicles. The confusion was palpable even from a distance. This was not part of the plan. Keene was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in Washington, maintaining deniability, letting Ashford's hired killers do the dirty work. But here he was, and he was screaming at them, pointing at the house, pointing at the assault team leader. His body language was frantic, desperate. Then Harlan understood. "He is not with them," Harlan said quietly. "He is trying to stop them." The assault team leader raised his weapon and shot Thomas Keene twice in the chest. Keene went down hard. The assault team leader stood over him and fired once more into his head. Then he turned back to his men and pointed at the house. The assault resumed. But something had shifted. The assault team's movements were different now, less coordinated. Some of the men were looking at each other, at the body of the man they had just executed, at the burning vehicles. Doubt had entered the equation, and doubt was poison for operations like this. Harlan seized the moment. He grabbed the radio that Brennan had taken from a dead operative and switched it to the assault team's frequency. "Your mission is compromised," Harlan transmitted. "Your employer just killed a deputy director of the CI. Every law enforcement agency in Virginia is about to descend on this location. You have approximately 10 minutes to evacuate before you are all arrested or dead." There was silence on the channel. Then a voice, the assault team leader, responded. "We have our orders. Complete the mission. No survivors." Harlan tried again. "You are not fighting for your country. You are fighting to protect a traitor." Richard Ashford sold American servicemen to the Soviets in 1980. Thomas Keene just died because he was trying to stop Ashford from committing more murders to cover up that treason. Is that who you want to die for? A traitor and a coward? More silence. Harlan could almost feel the uncertainty spreading through the assault team. These were professional soldiers. Most of them probably former special operations. Men who had sworn oaths to defend the Constitution. Men who had believed they were doing righteous work when they signed up with Sentinel Group. But righteousness was hard to maintain when you were executing unarmed CIA officials and besieging a house full of veterans who were only trying to expose corruption. The assault team leader's voice came back, harder now, trying to reassert control. "All units, ignore the propaganda. Breach and clear. Execute the mission." But the assault did not resume. The gunfire had stopped. In the yard, Harlan could see men lowering their weapons, talking to each other, looking at Keene's body, and then at the house, and then at each other. One man dropped his rifle and walked away, toward the tree line, toward the darkness beyond the firelight, deserting. Then another man followed, and another. The assault team was fracturing. The assault team leader screamed into his radio, ordering them back, threatening them with court-martial, with breach of contract, with whatever leverage he thought he had. But the desertion continued. Men who had signed up to be warriors, not executioners, were making the choice to walk away. Within 5 minutes, half the assault team was gone. The remainder held their position, but their body language showed they were done. They had lost the will to continue, lost the certainty that what they were doing was right. The assault team leader stood alone in the yard, surrounded by fire and bodies and the wreckage of his mission. He raised his rifle and fired a long burst at the safe house, emptying his magazine in a final act of defiant rage. Then he too turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Silence fell over the safe house. The only sounds were the crackling of flames and the distant wail of sirens. Someone had called the authorities. The fire department was coming, police, maybe FBI. Harlan, Sarah, and Brennan remained in the bunker room for another 10 minutes, weapons ready, waiting to see if the assault would resume. But it did not. The enemy had broken. The siege was over. Finally, Harlan stood and opened the door. The hallway was a wreck, bullet holes stitched across every wall. Spent brass littered the floor. The smell of cordite and smoke was overwhelming. But they were alive. They made their way downstairs carefully, clearing each room. The first floor was worse. Shattered glass, overturned furniture, blood on the walls where Sarah had made her stand. But no bodies inside. The assault team had dragged away their dead and wounded when they retreated. Outside, the yard was a battlefield. Harlan counted 8 bodies that had been left behind, too badly damaged to retrieve, too far gone to save. The claymores had been brutally effective. And near the burning vehicles, Thomas Keene lay in a spreading pool of his own blood. Harlan walked over and knelt beside the body. Keene's eyes were open, staring at nothing. His face was frozen in an expression of surprise, as if even in his final moment he could not quite believe what was happening. In Keene's hand was a phone. Harlan pried it from the dead man's fingers and checked the call log. The last call had been to 911, placed at 22:30 hours. Keene had called the police, had reported the assault, had tried to bring help. Sarah looked over Harlan's shoulder at the phone. Why? Why would he do that? He was part of this, part of the conspiracy. Harlan closed Keene's eyes. Maybe he had a limit. Maybe seeing Ashford order the execution of more veterans was a step too far. Maybe 40 years of guilt finally became too much to carry. Or maybe, Brennan said quietly, he realized that Ashford was never going to let him survive either. That once this was over, once all the witnesses were dead, Keene would be the last loose end, the last person who could testify about what really happened in Laos. They would never know for certain. Keene had taken his final motives to the grave. But whatever his reasons, he had acted against Ashford at the end, had tried to stop the killing, had died for that decision. Some debts could never be fully paid, but perhaps they could be partially redeemed. The sirens were closer now. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Harlan made a decision. We leave, he said, now before the authorities arrive. We cannot afford to be detained, not tonight, not with the hearing in the morning. But there are bodies, Sarah protested. A crime scene, we are witnesses. We have to make a statement. We will make our statement tomorrow, Harlan replied. In the Senate chamber, where it will matter, where it will be on record. Right now, we move. They gathered what they could, the evidence files, the weapons, the testimony that Brennan had written. They piled into Sarah's Honda, the same car that had carried them from New Mexico to Virginia days earlier. The car started on the first turn despite a shattered rear window and a bullet hole through the trunk. As they drove away from the burning safe house, Harlan looked back one final time. Fire trucks were arriving. Police cruisers with flashing lights. Officers would find the bodies, would find the weapons in the defensive positions and the evidence of a small war. They would investigate. They would ask questions. But by the time those questions led anywhere, the truth would already be public. The testimony would already be given. And the men responsible for 40 years of lies and death would already be facing judgment. They drove through the night, taking back roads, avoiding main highways where law enforcement might set up checkpoints. Sarah drove while Harlan rode shotgun, literally, the Remington across his lap. Brennan sat in the back, his written testimony in his hands, reading through it one more time, making sure every word was exactly right, every detail unimpeachable. As dawn broke over the Virginia countryside, they reached the outskirts of Washington, D.C. The capital was waking up, traffic beginning to build, the machinery of government grinding into motion for another day of hearings and votes and the endless machinery of democracy. In a few hours, that machinery would be turned against one of its own, a senator who had believed himself above accountability, a man who had sold lives for money and climbed to power on the backs of the dead. Today, the bill for those sins would come due. They parked 6 blocks from the Senate office buildings, walked the remaining distance on foot. 3 people, battered and exhausted, carrying folders full of evidence that would change history. No security detail, no federal protection, just themselves and the truth they carried. At the entrance to the Hart Senate office building, police officers stood guard. They looked at Harlan, at Sarah, at Brennan, saw the exhaustion, the blood on their clothes from the night's violence, the weapons they no longer carried, left locked in the car because they would not need them here. In this place, words were the only weapons that mattered. One of the officers stepped forward. Are you here for the Armed Services Committee hearing? Yes, Sarah said. We are testifying. The officer studied her badge, ran her name through his system, then nodded. You are on the witness list. Hearing room 216. You have 30 minutes. They entered the building and took the elevator up. The marble halls were filled with staffers and lobbyists and journalists drawn by the promise of scandal. Word had leaked that something big was happening. An emergency hearing, classified operations, possible treason. The sharks smelled blood in the water. Harlan, Sarah, and Brennan walked through the crowd without speaking. They reached hearing room 216 and found Senator Patricia Drummond waiting outside. She looked at them and her expression tightened. She saw the evidence of violence, understood without being told that the night had been long and brutal. "They tried to stop you," she said. It was not a question. "They failed," Harlan replied. Drummond nodded. "Then let us make sure their failure was complete. Let us make sure the truth is heard." She opened the door to the hearing room and they walked inside. The chamber was packed, every seat filled, cameras lined the back wall. This would be broadcast live. C-SPAN, news networks, the world watching. At the front of the room, behind an elevated bench, sat the members of the Armed Services Committee, 15 senators. 14 of them looked curious, concerned, uncertain about what they were about to hear. The 15th senator, seated in the chairman's position, looked like a man watching his own execution. Richard Ashford had come to the hearing, had to come. Refusing to attend would have been an admission of guilt. But his presence was a calculated risk. He believed he could control the narrative, believed his power and position would protect him as they had for 4 decades. He was about to learn he was wrong. Senator Drummond called the hearing to order. She outlined the purpose of the session. Investigation into the deaths of retired service members, evidence of conspiracy to commit murder, allegations of treason dating back to 1980. The room went silent. Every eye was on the witness table where Harlan, Sarah, and Brennan sat with their folders of evidence. Drummond looked at them. "Colonel Harlan, you may begin your testimony." Harlan stood. He did not look at Ashford, did not give him the satisfaction. Instead, he looked at the cameras, at the people watching from home, at the veterans who would hear this and finally understand why their brothers had died. "My name is Colonel Jack Harlan, United States Marine Corps, retired. In April 1983, I led a 9-man reconnaissance team on a classified operation in Laos designated Operation Crimson Dagger. We were told the mission was to extract a CIA asset. We were told there would be minimal enemy contact. We were told we would be home in 72 hours. He paused. The room waited. We were lied to. There was no asset. The mission was a setup. We walked into an ambush that had been prepared for us by our own government. 8 of my men died that night. They died because someone sold us to the enemy for money. And for 40 years, the men responsible have lived free while good Marines lay in graves with their families, never knowing the truth." Harlan opened his folder, began presenting evidence, bank records, dates, names, the story of betrayal told in documents that could not be argued with or explained away. Sarah went next. She spoke about her father, about growing up without him, about the lies her mother was told, about 3 years of investigation that had led her to this room. She presented the pattern of deaths, showed how each veteran from Operation Crimson Dagger had been systematically eliminated. Then it was Brennan's turn. And Ethan Brennan, career soldier, decorated officer, broken man seeking redemption, looked directly at Richard Ashford and began to speak. The testimony lasted 4 hours. By the end, the hearing room was in chaos. Journalists shouting questions, senators demanding answers, Ashford sitting frozen in his chair, his career imploding in real time. The truth was out, and the reckoning had only just begun. Ethan Brennan's voice filled the hearing room with the steady cadence of a man reciting his own indictment. He sat at the witness table with his hands folded in front of him, no notes, no hesitation. Every word was a nail driven into the coffin of his own career and possibly his freedom. But also every word was a nail driven into Richard Ashford's carefully constructed lie. "Senator Ashford gave me my first kill order on February 15th of this year," Brennan said. "The target was Thomas Hayes, retired gunnery sergeant, living in Wilmington, Delaware. I was told Hayes was a security risk, that he had been making threats against government officials, that he needed to be neutralized quietly." Brennan paused, took a breath, continued. "I staged it as a suicide, carbon monoxide in his garage, made it look like he had been drinking, got into his car, fell asleep with the engine running. The local police bought it. His family bought it. Everyone bought it except the people who knew Thomas Hayes, the people who knew he did not drink, the people who knew he was left-handed and would not have written a suicide note with his right hand." A senator from Ohio leaned forward. "You are confessing to murder, Colonel Brennan, on the record. Do you understand that?" "I understand perfectly," Brennan replied. "I am confessing to 7 murders. Thomas Hayes, Martin Reeves, Peter Sullivan, William Cross, Daniel Ortega, Frank Morrison, Raymond Cole. 7 men killed on the orders of Senator Richard Ashford to prevent them from testifying about Operation Crimson Dagger." The room erupted, journalists shouting, Cameras flashing, senators demanding order. At the center of the chaos, Richard Ashford sat motionless. His face had gone pale. His hands gripped the edge of the bench in front of him. Senator Drummond gavelled for silence. When the room finally quieted, she looked at Brennan. "Do you have evidence of these orders, Colonel?" "Communications. Recordings, anything that directly connects Senator Ashford to these crimes." Brennan reached into his jacket and produced a small digital recorder. He set it on the table. "I have 17 recorded conversations with Senator Ashford. In each one, he gives explicit instructions for eliminating witnesses. He uses code words, refers to the targets as security vulnerabilities. But the meaning is clear, and on 3 occasions, he names specific individuals from Operation Crimson Dagger." "Play them," Drummond ordered. The first recording began, Ashford's voice, unmistakable, coming through the speakers. The audio quality was perfect, every word clear. "The Phoenix problem needs to be resolved before March," Ashford's recorded voice said. "Make it look natural. Heart attack, stroke, something that will not raise questions." Brennan's voice responded, "Understood, Senator. What about collateral considerations?" "There are no collateral considerations," Ashford replied coldly. "These men are loose ends from an operation that never officially existed. They have no families that matter, no friends with influence. They are ghosts, and ghosts can disappear." The recording ended. The hearing room was silent. Ashford had gone from pale to gray. He started to stand, started to speak. Senator Drummond cut him off. "Senator Ashford, you will remain seated and silent unless called upon to testify. You are still the chairman of this committee, but that may change very quickly, depending on what else we hear today." Ashford sank back into his chair. His lawyer, who had been sitting behind him, leaned forward and whispered urgently. Ashford shook his head. The lawyer whispered again. Ashford pushed him away. Brennan played 2 more recordings, each one more damning than the last. In the third recording, Ashford mentioned Laos by name, mentioned the need to ensure that no one could ever prove what had happened there, mentioned the $200,000 that had set everything in motion 4 decades earlier. When the recordings finished, Senator Drummond looked at Ashford. "Senator, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Ashford stood slowly. He looked at Brennan with an expression of pure hatred. Then he looked at Harlan, at Sarah, at the cameras capturing every moment for posterity. "This is a setup," Ashford said. His voice was controlled, but there was a tremor underneath. "These recordings are fabricated. Deep fake technology. Anyone with the right software can create audio that sounds like someone else. This is a coordinated attack designed to destroy my campaign, to prevent me from reaching the presidency." Senator Drummond's expression did not change. "Then you are claiming you never had these conversations with Colonel Brennan?" "I am claiming that I am being framed," Ashford replied. Brennan stood. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Put it on speaker." After 3 rings, a voice answered. "Ashford residence." "This is Colonel Brennan," Brennan said calmly. "I need to speak with the senator about the Montana situation." There was a pause, then a click as the call was transferred. Ashford's voice came through the phone, live, real time, in the same room where the recorded voice had just played. "Brennan, what are you doing calling this number? I told you to use the secure line." "Senator," Brennan said, "I am currently testifying before the Armed Services Committee. This call is being broadcast live. Do you wish to continue this conversation?" The line went dead. The dial tone echoed through the hearing room. Brennan set the phone down. "Voice match analysis will confirm that was Senator Ashford, just as voice match analysis will confirm the recordings are authentic. I am not technically sophisticated enough to create deep fakes, but I am technically sophisticated enough to document my crimes, and his." Ashford tried to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had just watched the ground disappear beneath his feet. His lawyer was already gathering papers, already preparing to abandon the sinking ship. Sarah Mitchell stood. She had been waiting for this moment, waiting to look at the man who had ordered her father's death and tell him exactly what that death had cost. "Senator Ashford," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "My name is Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. My father was Sergeant David Mitchell, United States Marine Corps. He died in Laos in April 1983 as part of Operation Crimson Dagger. He died because you and Thomas Keene sold his team to Soviet intelligence for $200,000. She walked toward this bench where Ashford sat. 2 security officers moved to intercept, but Drummond waved them back. "I was 7 years old," Sarah continued. I do not remember much about my father. I remember he had kind eyes. I remember he used to read to me before bed. I remember the day 2 Marines came to our door and told my mother he was not coming home. I remember her crying for 3 days straight. Sarah stopped at the base of the bench, looked up at Ashford. My mother drank herself to death by the time I was 16, she said. She could not live with the loss. Could not live with never knowing why he died or what he died for. The Marines told her it was classified, told her it was for his country. But that was a lie, was it not, Senator? He died for your bank account. He died so you could buy a bigger house, a nicer car, a political career. Ashford stared at her. For the first time, something like shame flickered across his face. How many others? Sarah asked. How many other wives drank themselves into graves? How many other children grew up without fathers? How many families were destroyed so you could climb the ladder? 8 families, Harlan said quietly from his seat. 8 Marines. Some had wives. Some had children. All had mothers and fathers who were told comforting lies instead of hard truths. He stood and walked to join Sarah. Together they faced Ashford. David Mitchell saved my life, Harlan said. He pushed me down behind cover when the shooting started. He took the bullets that were meant for me. He died so I could live. And I have spent 41 years wondering why. Wondering what I could have done differently. Wondering if I had been faster or smarter or better, could I have saved him? Harlan's voice did not rise, but it filled the room nonetheless. Now I know the answer. There was nothing I could have done, because we were sold before we ever set foot in that jungle. The ambush was waiting for us. The coordinates had been given to the enemy. We were sheep being led to slaughter. And you, Senator, you were the shepherd who sold us to the wolves. The hearing room was absolutely silent. Every person present understood they were witnessing something historic. The exposure of a crime that had been hidden for 4 decades. The collapse of a man who had thought himself untouchable. Ashford gripped the bench. His knuckles were white. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You do not understand. You cannot understand. The Cold War was not a game. It was life and death. The survival of nations. Sometimes sacrifices had to be made. Sacrifices, Harlan repeated. You call it sacrifice when you volunteer other men to die. When you profit from their deaths. That is not sacrifice, Senator. That is murder. Senator Drummond stood, her voice cut through the tension. Senator Ashford, based on the testimony and evidence presented here today, I am recommending that the full Senate vote to expel you from this body. I am also recommending that the Department of Justice open an immediate investigation into charges of treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. And I am recommending that you be taken into custody immediately pending those investigations. She looked at the security officers. Take him. Ashford tried to stand. His legs would not support him. He collapsed back into his chair. The security officers moved in, helping him up, reading him his rights. The words were familiar. Everyone had heard them on television 1,000 times, but hearing them read to a United States senator in the chamber of the Senate itself was something else entirely. As they led Ashford toward the exit, he stopped, turned back to look at Harlan. It was not supposed to be you, Ashford said. The words came out desperate, broken. You were supposed to die too. You were supposed to die with the others. If you had just died like you were supposed to, none of this would have happened. Harlan met his eyes, but I did not die, and neither did the truth. They took Ashford away. The doors closed behind him. The hearing room erupted in chaos again. Senators shouting, journalists rushing for phones and laptops, camera crews scrambling for position. The story of the century breaking in real time. Harlan sat back down. Sarah sat beside him. Brennan had not moved from his position at the witness table. The 3 of them sat in the center of the storm, exhausted, battered, but alive. They had done what they came to do. The hearing continued for another 2 hours. More evidence was presented, more testimony given. Experts confirmed the authenticity of the recordings. Financial analysts traced the money from Soviet sources to Keene's account and from Keene to various investments that had funded Ashford's political rise. The case was airtight, unimpeachable. By the time Senator Drummond finally gavelled the hearing to a close, the sun was setting over Washington. The verdict of history had been rendered. Justice, delayed for 41 years, had finally arrived. But the day was not over. As Harlan, Sarah, and Brennan left the Senate building, they were swarmed by reporters. Microphones thrust in their faces, questions shouted from every direction. Who? What? When? Where? Why? The feeding frenzy of the media sensing blood and scandal and everything that made for compelling television. Security officers from the Senate cleared a path, got them to Sarah's car. They climbed in and Sarah drove away from the chaos, heading out of the city, away from the cameras and questions and the weight of what they had just done. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, finally stopped at a small park overlooking the Potomac River, got out and stood at the railing, watching the water flow past. "It is not over," Brennan said quietly. "Ashford has allies, people who benefited from his rise, people who do not want the full story to come out. They will try to contain this. Spin it. Maybe even make us disappear if they think they can get away with it." Harlan nodded. "I know. But now the truth is on the record. Now there are witnesses who cannot be silenced. Now the whole world is watching. That changes the equation." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we wait," Harlan replied. "The Justice Department will investigate. There will be trials, more testimony, more revelations. It will take months, maybe years. But the machine is in motion, and it will grind through to the end." He looked at Sarah. "Your father's name will be added to the memorial wall, officially, along with the others who died in Laos. They will be recognized, honored. Their families will know the truth." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for keeping your promise, for making sure they did not die twice." They stood in silence, watching the river, the same river that flowed past the memorials downtown, past the names carved in stone, past the places where the nation honored its fallen. Soon, 8 more names would join that roll of honor. 8 men who had been erased from history would be restored to it. Brennan's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his expression changed. "It is Emily," he said. "She is at the federal facility, safe." He answered the call, listened. His face softened in a way Harlan had not seen before. "I am okay," Brennan said into the phone. "It is over. You can come home soon." He listened again, then smiled. A real smile, genuine warmth. "I love you too," he said. "I will see you soon." He hung up and stood there for a moment, the phone in his hand, staring at nothing. "I thought I had lost her," Brennan said. "Thought I had sacrificed everything that mattered to protect her. But maybe it is not too late. Maybe I can still be the brother she deserves." "It is never too late to try," Sarah said. They returned to the car. Harlan suggested they go back to the safe house, or what was left of it, to collect anything that might have survived the fire. But when they arrived, they found the property cordoned off. FBI crime scene tape, investigators combing through the wreckage. The authorities had taken over. A senior agent approached them, showed credentials. FBI Organized Crime Division. "Colonel Harlan," the agent said, "we have been looking for you. We need statements about what happened here last night." "Then you should talk to Senator Drummond," Harlan replied. "She can provide context for why 20 men tried to kill us." The agent nodded. "We are already coordinating with congressional investigators, but we still need your statements. There are 8 bodies, extensive gunfire, evidence of military-grade explosives. This is a major crime scene." "We defended ourselves," Sarah said, showing her NCIS credentials, "against an assault by Sentinel Group contractors acting on illegal orders from Senator Ashford. Everything we did was in self-defense." The agent looked at the credentials, looked at Sarah, looked at the burned-out safe house. "I am sure it was," he said diplomatically. "But I still need statements, all 3 of you. It can wait until tomorrow if you need rest. But it cannot wait much longer than that." They agreed to come to the FBI field office the following morning. The agent gave them his card and returned to the investigation. Harlan, Sarah, and Brennan left the property and found a motel 30 miles away. 3 rooms, cash payment, no questions asked. Harlan locked the door to his room and sat on the bed. The adrenaline that had sustained him for the last 72 hours was finally fading. Exhaustion crashed over him like a wave. He lay back on the thin mattress and closed his eyes. For the first time in 41 years, Jack Harlan slept without dreaming of Laos. The next 3 days were a blur of statements and interviews and meetings with lawyers and federal prosecutors. The Justice Department moved quickly, empowered by the public outcry that had followed the hearing. Ashford was formally charged with treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and a dozen other counts. He was denied bail, considered a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. Thomas Keene's death was ruled a homicide. The assault team leader who had shot him was identified through forensic evidence and put on a most wanted list. Other members of the assault team were being tracked down and arrested. Sentinel Group's offices were raided. Documents seized, bank accounts frozen. The conspiracy was unraveling at speed. Brennan turned himself in formally and was charged with 7 counts of murder. But the prosecutor made it clear that in exchange for his cooperation and testimony, they would recommend leniency. He would serve time, but not life. Maybe 10 years, maybe less with good behavior. It was more mercy than he deserved, but less than full punishment. The mathematics of justice. Sarah returned to work at NCIS, but found herself reassigned. Her superiors were not comfortable with an agent who had just helped expose a sitting senator and a deputy director of the CIA. She was given a desk job, told to keep her head down. The message was clear: you have done enough. Do not make more waves. She ignored the message and started filing Freedom of Information requests for other classified operations from the 1980s. If it had happened once, she reasoned, it could have happened again. Other teams sold out, other men betrayed, other families lied to. She would find them. She would bring them into the light. Harlan returned to Montana. The cabin was gone, burned in the aftermath of Sullivan's death. But the land remained. He bought a trailer and parked it on the property, started clearing the debris, planning to rebuild. Not running away this time, not hiding, but not seeking the spotlight either. Just living, working, breathing. On the 10th day after the hearing, a package arrived. Federal Express. Inside was a letter from the Department of Defense. Official letterhead, signed by the Secretary himself. The letter informed Harlan that Operation Crimson Dagger had been declassified, that the 8 Marines who had died in Laos would be officially recognized, that their names would be added to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in a ceremony scheduled for Veterans Day, 6 weeks away, that their families would be notified and invited to attend, that the nation was sorry for the long delay in honoring their sacrifice. Harlan read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. He walked outside and looked at the mountains. The peaks were already white with early snow. Winter coming, the cycle continuing. He thought about David Mitchell, about Raymond Cole, about Bobby Sullivan and the others, about men who had died believing their country had abandoned them, who had been erased from history to protect the guilty. Now they would be remembered. Now their names would be spoken with honor. Now their families would know they had not died in vain. It was not enough, could never be enough. But it was something, a start, a foundation on which healing might be built. Harlan went back inside and called Sarah. She answered on the second ring. "Did you get the letter?" he asked. "I did," she replied. He could hear the emotion in her voice. "They are having a ceremony, my father's name, on the wall." "Will you go?" Harlan asked. "Yes, will you?" Harlan hesitated. He had avoided the wall for decades, could not bear to see the names, could not bear the weight of survival when so many had fallen. But maybe it was time. Maybe after all these years, it was time to face the stone and the names and the memories. "I will be there," he said. They talked for a few more minutes, made plans to meet in Washington for the ceremony, shared the small updates from their lives. The investigation continuing. Brennan's trial scheduled for the spring, Emily visiting her brother in federal custody and telling him she was proud of him. After they hung up, Harlan sat in the silence of the trailer. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, a sound like breathing, like the earth itself drawing air into its lungs and letting it out again. The eternal rhythm of the world going on, indifferent to the small dramas of men. But not entirely indifferent, because men left marks. They built and destroyed. They loved and betrayed. They kept promises or broke them. And the marks they left echoed through time, shaping the world that came after. Harlan had left his mark, not the mark he intended when he was young, not the mark of a warrior who died gloriously in combat, but the mark of a survivor who refused to let the dead be forgotten, who refused to let lies stand unchallenged, who had fought not with rifle and grenade, but with testimony and truth. And in the end, perhaps that was the more important battle. Perhaps the harder war was not the one fought in jungles against visible enemies, but the one fought in hearing rooms against the corruption that wrapped itself in flags and claimed to serve the very people it betrayed. 6 weeks later, Harlan stood at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. It was Veterans Day. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. Thousands of people filled the memorial grounds. Veterans in aging bodies carrying the memories of young wars. Families who had lost sons and fathers and brothers. Citizens who came to remember and honor. A ceremony was held. Speeches were given, the Secretary of Defense spoke about duty and sacrifice and the debt that could never be repaid. A military band played hymns and patriotic songs. And then, one by one, the names of the 8 Marines from Operation Crimson Dagger were read aloud. When they reached David Mitchell's name, Sarah stepped forward. She placed a hand on the wall where his name had been newly carved. Panel 01W, line 127. Her fingers traced the letters. Tears ran down her face, but she did not wipe them away. Harlan stood beside her. He placed his own hand on the wall, felt the cold stone, felt the weight of 41 years lifting. Not gone, never gone, but lighter, bearable. Other families came forward. A widow who had not known where her husband truly died. A son who had been born 6 months after his father was killed. A sister who had spent 4 decades wondering if her brother had suffered. They touched the stone, spoke quietly to the names, left flowers and flags and photographs. The rituals of remembrance, the small human gestures against the enormity of loss. When the ceremony ended, people began to drift away. But Harlan remained. Sarah stayed with him. They stood together in front of the wall as the afternoon light faded. "Thank you," Sarah said, "for not giving up, for fighting for them even when it would have been easier to let it go." "I made a promise," Harlan replied. "The day your father died, I promised I would make it mean something. I just did not know it would take 41 years." He looked at the wall, at the thousands of names carved into the black granite, each one a life, each one a story, each one a family's grief. "This war took so much," Harlan said quietly, "from so many people, and most of them never knew why, never understood the larger forces that sent their loved ones into the fire. They were just told to trust, to believe it was necessary, to accept the sacrifice. But they deserve better than blind trust," Sarah said. "They deserve the truth." Harlan nodded. "And now they have it. At least these 8, at least their families. It is not justice for everyone, but it is justice for them. And maybe that is all we can do, one name at a time, one truth at a time." They stood in silence as the rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, the sky opening up and washing over the memorial, over the names, over the living and the memory of the dead. Sarah opened an umbrella, held it over both of them. They stood together, daughter and survivor, guardian and witness, keeping vigil as the day turned to evening. And on the wall, freshly carved, the name David A. Mitchell joined the roll of honor. No longer forgotten, no longer erased. Finally home. The trial of Richard Ashford began on a cold morning in February, 4 months after his arrest in the Senate chamber. The federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia had been chosen for security reasons and proximity to Washington. The building was surrounded by barriers and armed officers. Media trucks lined the streets for blocks. The nation was watching. Harlan sat in the gallery with Sarah on his left and a reserved seat on his right that remained empty. Ethan Brennan was in a different facility, awaiting his own trial, but his testimony had been recorded and would be played for the jury. The prosecution had built its case with meticulous care. Evidence stacked upon evidence, witness after witness, a mountain of proof that could not be denied or explained away. The charges were read: treason, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, wire fraud, racketeering. The list went on. Each count carried decades in prison. Taken together, they amounted to a life sentence, even for a man 20 years younger than Ashford. Ashford sat at the defense table, looking smaller than he had in the Senate. The power was gone, the authority stripped away. He was just a 71-year-old man facing the consequences of choices made across a lifetime. His lawyers surrounded him, expensive suits and confident expressions, but even they knew the battle was already lost. This trial was not about innocence or guilt. It was about establishing the record, making the crimes official, giving the dead their due. The prosecution's opening statement lasted 90 minutes. The attorney, a woman in her 50s who had built her career prosecuting organized crime, laid out the story with devastating clarity. The betrayal in Laos, the $200,000, the 41 years of cover-up, the systematic elimination of witnesses, each piece connected to the next. A chain of evidence that began in 1983 and ended in a Senate hearing room with the world watching. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the defense attorneys looked shaken. The scope of it, the duration, the cold calculation required to commit these crimes year after year without remorse. Ashford's lead attorney stood for the defense opening statement. He tried to paint his client as a patriot who had made difficult choices in impossible circumstances. He talked about the Cold War, about the fog of war, about the pressure of command and the weight of secrets. He suggested that mistakes had been made, but that calling them treason was political persecution. It was a weak argument, and everyone knew it, including Ashford himself. He sat with his head down, not looking at the jury, not looking at the gallery where Harlan waited. The man who had once commanded rooms with his presence now seemed to be trying to disappear. The prosecution began calling witnesses, financial experts who traced the money, intelligence analysts who confirmed the classified details of Operation Crimson Dagger, military personnel who testified about the 8 Marines who had died. Each witness added another brick to the wall of evidence. On the third day, they called Sarah Mitchell. She walked to the witness stand with the bearing of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire adult life. She was sworn in, asked to state her name and occupation for the record. Then the prosecutor began. "Agent Mitchell, did you know your father?" Sarah shook her head. "Not really. I was 7 when he died. I have memories, fragments, the sound of his voice, the way he smelled like coffee and aftershave, how he would pick me up and spin me around until I was dizzy. But I did not know him, not the way I should have." The prosecutor nodded sympathetically. "What were you told about his death?" "That it was a training accident, classified location, that he died serving his country, that I should be proud of his sacrifice." "And was that the truth?" "No," Sarah said quietly. "He did not die in a training accident. He died in an ambush in Laos. An ambush that happened because Richard Ashford and Thomas Keane sold his team to Soviet intelligence. My father died so they could profit." The defense objected. The judge sustained, but the words were already in the record, already heard by the jury. The prosecutor continued. "Agent Mitchell, you spent 3 years investigating your father's death. What did you discover?" Sarah detailed her investigation, the pattern of deaths, the connections to Operation Crimson Dagger, the links between Sentinel Group and Ashford's campaign funds. She spoke with precision and authority. Every fact documented, every claim supported by evidence. When she finished, the defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggested she was biased, that her desire to blame someone for her father's death had led her to construct a conspiracy where none existed. That grief had clouded her judgment. Sarah remained calm, met his questions with steady answers. When he tried to rattle her, she did not break. Finally, frustrated, the defense attorney made a mistake. "Agent Mitchell," he said, "is it not true that you have been obsessed with your father's death since childhood? That you have built your entire identity around being the daughter of a dead Marine? That you cannot accept he died in a random accident and need to believe there was some grand conspiracy?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried across the courtroom. "My father did not die in a random accident. He died because powerful men decided his life was worth less than their ambition. And I am not obsessed. I am determined. There is a difference. Obsession is irrational, and determination is focused. And I was determined that my father and his teammates would not stay buried in lies." She turned to look directly at Ashford. "Senator Ashford stole my father from me, stole him from my mother, stole him from everyone who loved him. And then he had the audacity to continue living a life of privilege and power built on that theft. So yes, I investigated. Yes, I gathered evidence. Yes, I worked with Colonel Harlan to expose the truth. And I would do it again. Because that is what you do when someone takes everything from you. You fight back." The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge gavelled for order. The defense attorney sat down knowing he had just made things worse. Sarah was dismissed from the stand. As she walked back to her seat, she did not look at Ashford. She had said what needed saying. The rest was up to the jury. On the 5th day, Harlan was called to testify. He walked to the stand with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had walked through worse, was sworn in, stated his name. Colonel Jack Harlan, United States Marine Corps, retired. The prosecutor began with his service record. 38 years, multiple combat tours, decorations and commendations, a career of honor. Then she moved to Laos. "Colonel Harlan, will you tell the court what happened on April 9th, 1983? Harlan had told this story in the Senate hearing, had told it to investigators, had told it in dreams for 4 decades. But telling it here in a court of law with Ashford 10 feet away was different. This was not political theater. This was justice. He described the mission, the orders from Keene, the promises of light resistance, the reality of walking into a prepared kill zone, the sound of automatic weapons fire, the screams of men dying, David Mitchell pushing him down and taking the burst meant for his back. When he described carrying Mitchell's body 3 miles through the jungle to the extraction point, his voice almost broke. Almost, but he held it together, finished the story. The prosecutor asked more questions about the aftermath, about being debriefed and told to never speak of the operation, about the 41 years of silence, about watching men from his team die one by one and knowing someone was hunting them. Finally, she asked the question that mattered most. Colonel Harlan, before today, had you ever met Richard Ashford face to face? Once, Harlan said. In 1984, I was called to a classified briefing in Washington. I thought it was about Laos. Thought maybe they were finally going to tell me what had happened, why my team had walked into an ambush. And what happened at that briefing? Ashford was there. He was a lieutenant colonel then. He told me the operation had been compromised by enemy intelligence, that it was bad luck, that these things happened in war. He thanked me for my service, told me to move on with my life, said the classified nature of the operation meant I could never speak about it, but that my brothers had died heroes. The prosecutor paused. Did you believe him? I wanted to, Harlan said. I wanted to believe that their deaths meant something, that it was just bad luck and not something worse. So I tried to move on, buried it deep, but it never stayed buried. 41 years and I still wake up in the middle of the night hearing David Mitchell scream my name. Do you blame yourself for what happened in Laos? Every day, Harlan replied. Every single day. I was the team leader. My job was to bring them home, and I failed. 8 men died on my watch. But it was not your fault, the prosecutor said gently. The mission was compromised before you ever set foot in Laos. You were betrayed by the very people who sent you. Harlan looked at Ashford. The senator was staring at the table, would not meet his eyes. I know that now, Harlan said. But knowing does not change the feeling, does not bring them back, does not give those families their fathers and sons and brothers. All it does is tell me who to blame. And I blame Richard Ashford. I blame Thomas Keene. I blame everyone who knew the truth and chose to hide it. The prosecutor thanked him. The defense attorney declined to cross-examine. What could he ask? Harlan's testimony was unimpeachable. His service record beyond question. Attacking him would only make things worse. Harlan returned to his seat. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. 2 survivors. 2 people who had lost everything to Ashford's greed, finding strength in each other. The trial continued for 3 more weeks. More witnesses. More evidence. The recorded conversations played in court. Ashford's voice giving kill orders, discussing payment, referring to the dead Marines as problems that needed to be solved. The defense tried to argue that the recordings were out of context, that Ashford had been investigating Sentinel Group, not directing it, that he was gathering evidence for his own prosecution of the conspiracy. It was absurd, and the jury saw through it immediately. On March 15th, the case went to the jury. Deliberations took 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Ashford showed no reaction when the verdict was read. He sat motionless as the judge thanked the jury and set a sentencing hearing for 2 weeks later. Only when the marshals came to take him back into custody did he finally stand. Finally look at the gallery, his eyes found Harlan. For a moment, their gazes locked. Harlan saw something in Ashford's face. Not remorse, not apology, just a kind of weary resignation. The look of a man who had gambled everything and lost. Then Ashford was led away. The trial was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Harlan and Sarah pushed through without comment. They had said everything that needed saying in the courtroom. Now they just wanted to leave, to breathe air that was not poisoned by the past. They walked 3 blocks before the crowd thinned, found a small park with benches overlooking the Potomac, sat down side by side. It is done, Sarah said. Harlan nodded, not finished, but done. What is the difference? Done means the trial is over. Ashford is convicted. The truth is on record. Finished would mean everyone is healed, everyone is whole, and that is never going to happen. Some wounds do not close. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Do you think my father would be proud of what we did? Harlan turned to look at her, saw David Mitchell's eyes looking back at him across 4 decades. I think your father would be amazed, Harlan said. Amazed that his 7-year-old daughter grew up to be the woman who brought down a senator and a CIA director. amazed that she never gave up, never stopped fighting. Yes, he would be proud, more than you can imagine. Tears ran down Sarah's face. She did not wipe them away, just let them fall. I wish I could have known him, she said, really known him. As an adult, talked to him, asked him about his life, learned who he was beyond the uniform and the flag. I knew him, Harlan said, not well. We only served together for 8 months, but I knew him well enough. He was a good Marine, good husband, good father. He talked about you all the time, showed pictures, told stories about things you said and did. You were his whole world. What did he say about me? Harlan smiled, remembering. He said you were going to change the world someday, said you had fire in you, determination, that you did not accept no for an answer even at 7 years old. He was right about that. Sarah laughed through her tears. I wish he could see what happened. See Ashford convicted. See his name on the wall. See that he mattered. Maybe he can, Harlan said. I do not know if I believe in an afterlife, but I want to believe that somehow, somewhere, the dead know when their stories are told, when they are remembered, when justice is done. They sat in silence, watching the river, the same river that had flowed past on the day of the Senate hearing, the same river that had flowed when 8 Marines died in a jungle halfway around the world, the river that kept flowing regardless of human drama, indifferent but eternal. The sentencing hearing 2 weeks later was brief. The judge had clearly already decided. He spoke for 20 minutes about the nature of the crimes, about the betrayal of trust, about the lives destroyed. Then he handed down the sentence. Richard Ashford was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would serve his time at ADX Florence in Colorado, the Supermax facility where the most dangerous federal prisoners were housed. He would spend 23 hours a day in a concrete cell, 1 hour for exercise in a concrete yard. No contact with other prisoners, no possibility of early release. It was, in effect, a death sentence. Ashford was 71 years old. He would die in that cell. When the judge asked if Ashford had anything to say before being remanded to custody, the senator stood. His lawyers tried to stop him, but he waved them away. He looked at the gallery, at Harlan, at Sarah. I am sorry, Ashford said. His voice was hoarse, broken, not for being caught, not for the trial or the conviction. I am sorry for what I did, for the choice I made in 1983, for every choice I made after that to hide it. I told myself it was necessary, that it was for the greater good, that the sacrifice of a few was justified by the benefit to many. He paused, took a breath. I was wrong. There is no greater good that justifies selling men to their deaths. There is no benefit worth the cost of those lives. I destroyed families, destroyed futures, destroyed everything that mattered so I could climb higher. And for what? Power, money, status, things that mean nothing now, things that cannot comfort me in the cell where I will die. Ashford turned to face Harlan directly. Colonel Harlan, I know my apology means nothing. I know words cannot undo what I have done. But I want you to know that I remember every name. David Mitchell, Raymond Cole, Bobby Sullivan, all of them. I remember. And I will carry them with me into that cell. They will be my company in the darkness, my reminder of who I really am. He sat down. The marshals came and took him away. This time, he did not look back. After the sentencing, Harlan and Sarah were approached by a woman in a Navy uniform. Captain's insignia. She introduced herself as the new director of the NCIS investigation into historic war crimes and cover-ups. Agent Mitchell, the captain said, we want you to lead the unit. Full-time, dedicated resources. Your mission will be to find other operations like Crimson Dagger, other men who were betrayed and forgotten, other families who deserve the truth. Sarah looked at Harlan. He nodded. I accept, Sarah said. Good, the captain replied. Report to headquarters Monday. We have a lot of work ahead of us. She shook hands with the both of them and left. Sarah turned to Harlan, a smile breaking across her face. We can do this, she said. We can find them. All the forgotten operations, all the hidden betrayals. We can bring them into the light. Not we, Harlan said gently. You. This is your mission now. Your purpose. I am done. Sarah's smile faded. What do you mean? I mean, I am 63 years old and I am tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of living in the past. I did what I set out to do. Your father's name is on the wall. His killers are in prison. The truth is known. Now I need to rest. But there are others who need help, Sarah protested. Other veterans, other families. And you will help them, Harlan replied. You do not need me for that. You are stronger than you think, more capable. You have everything you need to carry this forward. He put his hand on her shoulder. You are not doing this for me anymore, he said. You are doing it for them, for everyone who was betrayed and erased. That is a mission worth having. But it is your mission, not mine. My war is over. Sarah hugged him. He held her for a long moment. The daughter of the man who died in his place. The woman who had helped him finally fulfill a 41-year-old promise. When they separated, Sarah wiped her eyes. Will I see you again? Of course, Harlan said. I am not disappearing. I am just going home. You know where to find me. Montana, Sarah said. Montana, Harlan confirmed. They parted ways outside the courthouse. Sarah to her new assignment. Harlan to the truck he had borrowed for the drive back west. He stopped once on the way out of Virginia at a small cemetery where Raymond Cole was buried. Put flowers on the grave. Told his old friend that it was finished. That Ashford would die in prison. That the truth had won. Then he drove west, through the night, through the long, empty miles where the country opened up into vast spaces and endless, looking back to Montana where the cabin was slowly being rebuilt, where the horses waited, where the mountains stood eternal and indifferent. He arrived at dawn, the sun breaking over the peaks, the valley filled with golden light. Harlan parked the truck and stood looking at his land, at the cleared foundation where the new cabin would rise, at the corral where the mare nickered a greeting. This was home, not a place to hide, not a refuge from the world, just home, a place where he could finally set down the weight he had carried for so long. Harlan walked to the foundation and began to work. Measured boards, marked cuts, the familiar motions of building, creating something from nothing. It would take months to finish, maybe a year, but he had time now, all the time in the world. As he worked, he thought about the men who were gone. David Mitchell, Raymond Cole, Bobby Sullivan, the others from Laos, the others from all the other wars, the names on the wall, the names not yet on the wall, the endless roll call of the dead. He could not bring them back, could not undo their deaths, but he had done something, had made their sacrifice mean something, had ensured they would be remembered not as training accidents or bad luck, but as men who had been betrayed and deserved better. That would have to be enough. 6 months later, Harlan stood in his finished cabin. It was smaller than the old one, more efficient, better insulated. He had built it himself with his own hands. Every board placed with purpose, every nail driven with care. It was not just a structure, it was proof that you could rebuild. That destruction was not final, that something new could rise from ashes. A knock at the door interrupted his inspection. He opened it to find Sarah standing on the porch, a duffel bag over her shoulder. I was in the area, she said with a smile. Thought I would check in, see how the construction went. Harlan stepped aside. Come in. She entered and looked around, nodded approval. It is good, strong, it will last. That is the idea, Harlan said. They sat at his small kitchen table. Sarah told him about her work with the NCIS unit. They had identified 12 other operations that showed signs of betrayal or cover-up. 3 were already being investigated. Families were being contacted. Records were being declassified. The work was slow but steady. You were right, Sarah said. I did not need you for this. But I am glad you were there at the beginning. Glad you showed me it was possible. We all need someone to show us it is possible, Harlan replied. Your father showed me. Now I showed you. Maybe someday you will show someone else. Sarah pulled an envelope from her bag. I brought you something. Harlan opened it. Inside was a photograph. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall, a specific panel, 8 names, the men from Operation Crimson Dagger. And standing in front of the wall, touching the names, were people Harlan did not recognize. Families, wives who had become widows, children who had grown up without fathers, all of them finally able to honor their dead. We held a memorial service last month, Sarah said. Invited all the families, told them the full story. They wanted me to thank you. They wanted you to know it mattered, that finally knowing the truth mattered. Harlan stared at the photograph, at the faces of people he had never met but whose lives had been shaped by the same loss that had shaped his. Tell them they are welcome, he said quietly. Sarah stayed for dinner. They ate venison that Harlan had hunted and vegetables from his garden. They talked about small things, the weather, the horses, Sarah's plans to buy a house instead of renting an apartment. Normal conversation between people who had been through hell together and come out the other side. As the sun set, Sarah prepared to leave. She hugged Harlan goodbye. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," Harlan replied. He watched her drive away, watched until the taillights disappeared down the valley road. Then he went back inside, poured a glass of whiskey, sat in front of the fireplace with the photograph Sarah had given him. The faces in the photo were strangers, but they were connected to him by invisible threads, by shared loss, by the ripples of long-ago violence spreading through time. They were all part of the same story, the story of men who had fought and died, the story of families left behind, the story of truth buried and finally unearthed. Harlan set the photograph on the mantel. Next to it, he placed the old photo of the 9 Marines in Da Nang, past and present, before and after, the circle closing. He sat back down and closed his eyes. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something that might have been peace. Not happiness, not joy, but peace. The quiet that comes when the storm finally passes and the world goes still. Outside, the Montana night wrapped around the cabin. Stars emerged in the darkening sky. The wind moved through the pines with its eternal whisper. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, the sounds of a world continuing, indifferent but alive. Jack Harlan sat in that cabin he had built with his own hands and let the peace wash over him. The war was over, the promises kept, the dead honored, the guilty punished. Some debts could never be repaid, but they could be acknowledged, they could be honored. And in that honoring, perhaps both the living and the dead could find a measure of rest. The shepherd had led his flock through the valley of darkness, had lost so many along the way. But the ones who remained, the ones who carried the memory forward, they would endure. They would ensure that the fallen were never forgotten, that their names would be spoken with reverence, that their sacrifice would mean something. That was all anyone could ask. That was all anyone could give. Harlan opened his eyes and looked at the photographs on the mantel, at the faces of the dead, at the faces of the living who had gathered to honor them. "Rest easy, brothers," he whispered to the empty room. "Your war is over. Your names are known. You are home." And in the silence that followed, in the peace of the Montana night, it almost felt like they answered. Like somewhere beyond the veil of death and time, 8 Marines stood at ease. Their watch finally ended, their duty fulfilled. The last shepherd had brought them home, and now, finally, he could rest too. The fire burned low, the cabin settled into the stillness, and Jack Harlan, survivor of wars both foreign and domestic, warrior and guardian, accuser and witness, closed his eyes and slept the dreamless sleep of the justified. The reckoning was complete.